They said the girl who survived the massacre was cursed. They said the forest itself had chosen her, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. When 25 royal wolves abandoned their king to bow before an exiled woman in a frozen cabin, the entire kingdom held its breath. This is the story of Kayla Thorne, the outcast who became the wildest force a throne had ever known. Stay until the end to see how a girl rejected by her village became the queen of beasts. And don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. The night Kayla Thorne's life ended, she was 14 years old and screaming into a forest that had never answered anyone before. Blood soaked the dirt floor of her family's cabin. Her mother lay crumpled near the hearth, eyes open and unseeing. Her father's hand still gripped the axe he'd tried to use against the raiders. 6 men with scarred faces and iron blades, men who killed for coin and sport in equal measure. They'd come for supplies. They'd stayed for cruelty. Kayla ran. She didn't know where she was going, only that the trees swallowed her whole, branches tearing at her skin, roots threatening to trip her with every desperate step. Behind her, boots crashed through undergrowth. Laughter echoed between the pines. Little rabbit's got nowhere to go. Catch her before she bleeds out. Waste of good fun otherwise. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred, and when her foot caught on a root and she went down hard, palm scraping against stone, she knew it was over. The first raider reached her, grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanked her head back, and Kayla screamed, not a cry for help, not a plea for mercy, a scream of pure, unfiltered rage. The forest answered. It started as a rumble beneath the earth, a vibration that climbed up through her bones and rattled her teeth. The raider's grip loosened. His face went slack with confusion. Then the undergrowth exploded. Wolves poured from the darkness like a flood of fur and fangs, gray, black, silver-white, eyes gleaming with feral intelligence. They moved as one entity, a wave of muscle and hunger that crashed over the raiders with surgical precision. Screams replaced laughter. Blood sprayed across tree bark. A bear emerged from the shadow of an ancient oak, roaring as it rose on hind legs, and what followed was not a fight but an execution. Kayla watched from her knees, trembling, as the forest dismantled the men who'd murdered her parents. When it was over, when the last raider stopped twitching and the night fell silent except for the sound of heavy breathing, the wolves turned to her. She should have run. She couldn't move. The largest wolf, a massive creature with a coat like storm clouds and eyes the color of amber, approached slowly. It lowered its head, sniffed her outstretched hand. Then it sat beside her, close enough that its warmth bled into her shivering body, and it stayed. They all stayed. The village elders found her at dawn, surrounded by predators that should have torn her apart. Unnatural, Elder Rowan whispered, his face pale beneath his beard. The girl's been touched by something dark. She called them, another elder hissed. You saw the bodies. No animal kills like that unless it's commanded. Kayla tried to explain, tried to tell them she didn't do anything, that she'd just screamed, that she didn't understand, but the words died in her throat when she saw the way the villagers looked at her. Not with pity, with fear. The wolves had left by then, melting back into the forest as mysteriously as they'd appeared. But the damage was done. Kayla Thorne, orphaned and blood-soaked, became the girl the wild had chosen. And in a village where survival meant order, predictability, and fear of the unknown, that made her a threat. They didn't kill her. That would have been too obvious, too cruel to justify. Instead, they let her live in her parents' cabin, alone. You'll have food, Elder Rowan said stiffly, avoiding her eyes. Enough to survive, but you'll stay away from the village center, away from the children, away from people. For how long? Kayla's voice was small, broken. The elder finally met her gaze, and what she saw there was worse than hatred, pity laced with revulsion. Until you leave, he said quietly, or until we're sure you're not a danger. Neither condition, Kayla would learn, was ever meant to be fulfilled. The first year was the hardest. Kayla spent her days chopping wood, tending a small garden, hunting when she could. She taught herself to set traps, to read weather patterns in the sky, to move through the forest without making a sound. The skills her father had begun to teach her became her religion: survival, self-reliance, silence. But the loneliness was a living thing, a weight that pressed against her chest at night when the cabin creaked and the wind howled, and she remembered what it felt like to hear her mother's voice, her father's laugh. The animals came back. Not every day, not in numbers like that first terrible night, but they came. A fox would appear at the edge of the clearing, watching her with curious eyes. A raven would land on her windowsill and refuse to leave until she offered it a scrap of bread. Once a young deer walked right up to her while she was fetching water from the stream, close enough to touch, and stood there as if waiting for something Kayla didn't know how to give. She tried to ignore them. She tried to shoo them away. But they kept coming back. And slowly, so slowly she barely noticed it happening, Kayla stopped being afraid of what she was. On her 16th birthday, she made a decision. She packed what little she owned into a worn leather satchel, left a note on the cabin door that said simply, "Thank you for the food," and walked into the forest without looking back. If the village wanted her gone, she'd give them exactly what they wanted. She'd disappear. The northern frontier was a place people spoke about in whispers, a stretch of wilderness so remote, so hostile, that only trappers, criminals, and the truly desperate ventured there. Winters lasted 8 months. Summers were brief and brutal. The land was all jagged peaks, dense forest, and silence so deep it felt like the world had forgotten how to speak. It was perfect. Kayla found a valley tucked between 2 mountains, sheltered from the worst of the wind, with a stream that ran clear even in winter and enough flat ground to build on. She spent 3 months constructing her cabin, cutting timber, notching logs, sealing gaps with mud and moss. Her hands blistered, bled, hardened. Her body grew lean and strong. By the time the first snow fell, she had walls, a roof, a fireplace, and a door that locked. She had a home, and she had done it entirely alone. The animals, though, they never left her alone. Wolves denned nearby. She'd hear them howling at night, close enough that the sound raised goosebumps on her skin. A family of foxes made their home beneath her cabin's foundation. Hawks circled overhead during the day, and once she swore she saw a mountain lion watching her from a ridge, eyes glowing in the twilight. She didn't call them. She didn't need to. They just knew. Kayla tried to keep her distance. She'd learned the hard way that people feared what they didn't understand. And even here, miles from civilization, she couldn't shake the terror that one day someone would see, would know, and the cycle would start all over again. But the forest didn't care about her fear. One winter evening, as she was returning from checking her trapline, she found a wolf lying in the snow near her cabin door. A young male, his leg caught in a rusted steel trap that must have been left by a trapper decades ago. He snarled when she approached, teeth bared, but his eyes were clouded with pain. Kayla should have left him. She didn't. She knelt in the snow, speaking in low, soothing tones, and slowly, so slowly, reached for the trap. The wolf snapped at her once, a warning, but didn't bite. She pried the jaws open, and the moment his leg was free, he lurched to his feet and limped into the trees without a backward glance. 3 days later, she found a freshly killed rabbit on her doorstep. The wolf sat at the edge of the clearing watching her. Kayla stared back, heart pounding. Then she picked up the rabbit, nodded once in acknowledgement, and went inside. The wolf was gone when she looked again. But the next morning, there were tracks in the snow, dozens of them, circling her cabin like a protective ring. Years passed. Kayla turned 18, then 20, then 22. She stopped counting after that. Time moved differently in the mountains, measured in seasons, storms, and the rhythms of the wild. She became a ghost story in the villages far below, a legend whispered around fires. The girl who talks to wolves. The witch of the northern peaks. Don't go too far into the mountains or she'll steal your soul. She didn't care. She'd built a life that didn't need their approval, their acceptance, their fear. She had her cabin, her routines, her silence. She had the forest, and the forest had her. She'd stopped fighting it years ago, the connection, the pull, the way animals gravitated toward her like iron to a lodestone. She still didn't understand it, couldn't explain it, but she'd learned to accept it as part of who she was, the girl the wild chose. She was 24 when the blizzard came. It started as a whisper of wind, a change in pressure that made the birds go silent and the air taste like metal. Kayla had lived through enough winters to recognize the signs. She spent 2 days preparing, stocking firewood, securing the shutters, filling every container she owned with water from the stream before it froze solid. When the storm hit, it hit like the fist of an angry god. Snow fell so thick she couldn't see 3 feet beyond her window. Wind howled with a voice that sounded almost human, battering the cabin walls, tearing at the roof. The temperature plummeted until even the fire struggled to keep the cold at bay. Kayla bundled herself in furs, fed the fire, and waited. 1 day, 2, 3. On the 4th night, as the blizzard screamed its fury and the world outside became an indistinct blur of white and shadow, she heard it. Scratch. 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 Something at the door. Kayla froze, heart hammering. It could be a branch. Could be debris caught in the wind. Scratch. 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 Rhythmic, deliberate, alive. She grabbed the iron poker from the hearth, approached the door slowly, and pressed her ear against the wood. Heavy breathing, multiple sources, a low, desperate whine. Kayla's hand shook as she lifted the latch. The door exploded inward under the weight of bodies. Massive, fur-covered, ice-crusted bodies that tumbled into her cabin in a heap of limbs and snow and desperation. She stumbled back, poker raised, and then froze as her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. Wolves, not 1, not 2, 25. They filled her small cabin like a living tide, panting, shivering, eyes gleaming in the firelight. Some collapsed immediately, too weak to stand. Others pressed against the walls, tongues lolling, frost clinging to their fur in thick sheets. They were dying. Kayla's breath came in short, sharp gasps. This was insane. This was suicide. 25 wolves in an enclosed space with a single human. She'd be torn apart the moment one of them decided she was food instead of shelter. But as her eyes swept over them, taking in the gaunt ribs, the raw paws, the way they looked at her with something that wasn't hunger but pleading, she made a choice. "All right," she whispered, lowering the poker. "All right, you can stay." She didn't know if they understood, but the way they settled, the way the tension bled out of the room and was replaced by exhausted, grateful silence, told her they did. Kayla moved through the cabin like a woman possessed. She threw every log she had onto the fire, building it into a roaring inferno that pushed back the cold. She pulled out every scrap of dried meat, every bit of stored food, and began dividing it into portions. The wolves watched her with unblinking eyes, too weak to do more than lift their heads. "I don't have enough for all of you," she said aloud, her voice shaking. "But you'll get what I can give." She started with the smallest, the weakest, a silver-furred female who looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Kayla knelt beside her, offering a piece of venison. The wolf sniffed it, then took it gently from her hand, chewing slowly. One by one, she fed them. It took hours. Her stores dwindled to almost nothing. But she didn't stop until every wolf had something in its belly, until the worst of the shivering had subsided and the cabin had transformed from a place of solitary survival into something else entirely, a sanctuary. As dawn approached and the storm finally began to ease, Kayla collapsed against the wall, exhausted, and surveyed her cabin. 25 wolves. Some slept in piles, bodies tangled together for warmth. Others rested alone, eyes half closed but alert. The largest, a massive black wolf with a scar across his muzzle, sat near the door, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "What are you?" she whispered. The wolf didn't answer, but it didn't look away either. Kayla closed her eyes, too tired to care, and let sleep take her. When she woke, the storm was over, and her cabin was surrounded by an army. The sound of steel on leather woke her, the unmistakable rasp of swords being drawn, the jingle of armor, the organized thud of boots in snow. Kayla's eyes snapped open. The wolves were already awake, bristling, teeth bared as they pressed toward the windows and door. The largest black wolf stood rigid, hackles raised, a growl building in its throat like distant thunder. Kayla staggered to the window and looked out. Oh gods, soldiers. At least 50 of them, armored and armed, arranged in a perfect perimeter around her cabin. Banners snapped in the wind, crimson and gold, emblazoned with the sigil of a crowned wolf. The Royal Army. And at the center of it all, mounted on a war horse as black as midnight, sat a man who could only be one person. King Draven Varkos. He was younger than she'd imagined, couldn't be more than 30, with sharp features, dark hair, and eyes like chips of winter ice. He wore no crown, but he didn't need one. Authority radiated from him like heat from a forge. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, and walked toward her door. Kayla's heart hammered against her ribs. This is it. This is how I die. She grabbed the poker again, useless against an army, but it was all she had, and yanked the door open before he could knock. King Draven stopped 3 paces from her threshold. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then his gaze shifted past her, into the cabin, and his expression, cold, controlled, unreadable, cracked. Impossible, he breathed. Kayla followed his gaze. The wolves had moved to flank her, forming a protective wall between her and the king. Their eyes glowed in the morning light, fixed on Draven with a focus that was almost familiar. "These are your wolves," Kayla said slowly, realization dawning. "Aren't they?" Draven's jaw tightened. When he spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. They were. He raised his hand, a sharp, commanding gesture Kayla had seen trainers use with dogs. The wolves didn't move. He tried again, barked an order in a language she didn't recognize. Nothing. The black wolf, the one with the scar, took a step forward, placing itself directly between Kayla and the king, and in that moment, the entire dynamic shifted. This wasn't a rescue. It was a confrontation. "Who are you?" Draven demanded, his gaze snapping back to Kayla. "What did you do to them?" "I didn't do anything," Kayla shot back, anger flaring past her fear. "They came to me. They were freezing and starving, and I just... You sheltered them. Yes, fed them. What was I supposed to do? Let them die?" Draven stared at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve, something that defied every rule he'd built his life around. "These wolves," he said slowly, "have been bound to my bloodline for 300 years. They answer to no one but the crown. They would die before abandoning their post." His eyes narrowed. "Yet here they are, choosing you." The weight of those words settled over the clearing like fresh snow. Kayla's throat went dry. "I don't want them," she said hoarsely. "I didn't ask for this." "Neither did I," Draven replied. His hand moved to the hilt of his sword. Not a threat exactly, but a reminder. But here we are. Silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Then Draven did something Kayla didn't expect. He stepped back. "I'm not here to harm you," he said, though every line of his body radiated coiled tension. "But I need to understand what's happening, and you..." He gestured at the wolves, at the cabin, at her. "You're the only one who can explain it." Kayla's grip on the poker loosened slightly. "What do you want from me?" Draven's smile was cold and sharp. "Come to the capital. Let me see what you are. If you're a threat, I'll know. If you're not..." He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. Kayla's mind raced. Refuse, and he'd come back with more soldiers, more force. Accept, and she'd be walking into a gilded cage surrounded by people who'd want her dead the moment they understood what she could do. But the wolves... She looked at them. They looked back, amber eyes steady and sure. They trust him, she realized. Even now, even choosing me, they don't hate him. That had to mean something. "If I say yes," Kayla said carefully, "I come on my terms. I'm not a prisoner, not a pet, not a weapon." Draven studied her for a long, measuring moment. Then he inclined his head. Agreed. Kayla didn't believe him, but she also didn't have a choice. "Give me an hour to pack," she said. Draven nodded and turned back toward his soldiers. As Kayla closed the door, her hands shaking, she heard his voice carry across the snow. "Stand down. No one approaches the cabin. No one threatens the woman. Is that understood?" "Yes, Your Majesty." Kayla leaned against the door, eyes closed, heart pounding. The girl the wild chose was about to enter a world that had spent her entire life teaching her she didn't belong. And 25 royal wolves had just made it impossible for anyone to look away. The journey to the capital took 6 days. Kayla had never traveled with an army before, had never traveled with anyone before, really, and the experience was suffocating. Soldiers flanked her on all sides, their eyes following her every movement with a mixture of suspicion and poorly concealed fear. They didn't speak to her, didn't acknowledge her except to bark directions or warn her away from the supply wagons. The wolves changed everything. They moved as a unit around her horse, a living barrier that no soldier dared cross. At night, when the army made camp, the wolves formed a circle around Kyla's tent, lying so close together that their bodies became a wall of fur and muscle. The soldiers kept their distance, whispering among themselves when they thought she couldn't hear. Unnatural. Witch. She's got them under some kind of spell. Has to be. Kayla pulled her cloak tighter and pretended not to notice. King Draven rode at the front of the column, always just out of earshot, always watching. She caught him staring more than once, his expression unreadable, calculating, like he was trying to solve an equation that refused to balance. He didn't speak to her after that first morning at the cabin, didn't ask questions or make threats. He just observed. It was worse than hostility. On the third night, as Kayla sat by her small fire trying to choke down the rations the soldiers had grudgingly provided, one of the younger wolves, a gray female with intelligent eyes, padded over and dropped something at her feet. A rabbit. Freshly killed, still warm. Kayla stared at it, then at the wolf. "I can't take your food," she said quietly. The wolf huffed, nudged the rabbit closer with her nose, then retreated to the circle. Across the camp, she felt eyes on her. Soldiers watching, judging, witch, monster, abomination. Kayla skinned the rabbit with hands that didn't shake and roasted it over her fire in silence. The meat tasted like ash. By the fifth day, the whispers had evolved into something darker. Kayla overheard two soldiers talking as they broke camp, their voices low but carrying in the morning stillness. "My cousin serves in the palace guard. Says Lord Corvin's been asking questions about her." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that end with a noose or a pyre. He's convinced she's using blood magic. Says no natural person could turn the royal guard like that. Maybe he's right. Maybe the king's making a mistake bringing her to Valdris." "The king doesn't make mistakes, but he might be making an exception." Kayla's hands tightened on her horse's reins. She urged the mare forward, putting distance between herself and the conversation, but the words followed her like ghosts. Shadow, the massive black wolf, moved closer to her horse, his amber eyes scanning the soldiers with an intensity that made several of them reach for their weapons. "Easy," Kayla murmured. "We're fine. We have to be fine." But she didn't believe it. That night, Draven finally broke his silence. He appeared at her fire after the camp had settled, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who'd never had to announce his presence. The wolves stirred but didn't rise, a sign of recognition, if not submission. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the space across from her. Kayla nodded, not trusting her voice. Draven sat, and for a long moment, they simply watched the flames dance between them. "You're afraid," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "Wouldn't you be?" "Yes." His honesty surprised her. "But fear can be useful. It keeps you sharp, alert." He paused. "It can also make you do foolish things. Like agreeing to walk into a den of people who want me dead?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Precisely." Kayla poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. "Why did you really bring me to the capital? You could have killed me at the cabin, told everyone the wolves died with me. No one would have questioned a king." Draven was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. 3 months ago," he said finally, "a village on the northern border was attacked by a pack of rabid wolves. 30 people died before my soldiers could respond. When we investigated, we found the wolves had been driven mad by starvation, their hunting grounds destroyed by illegal logging operations I'd authorized to fund the war effort." He looked up, meeting her eyes across the fire. "I killed 30 people with a signature on a document. I didn't mean to, didn't even know their names, but they died because I failed to see the consequences of my actions." His jaw tightened. "When I found you in that cabin, surrounded by wolves that should have been with me, I realized something. You didn't command them through force or breeding or ancient magic. You earned their loyalty by seeing them as they are, by giving them what they needed. So I'm what? A lesson? An experiment?" "You're a chance," Draven said quietly, "to learn how to rule differently, to understand what I've been doing wrong. He stood, brushing ash from his cloak. Lord Corvin and his allies will try to destroy you. They see you as a threat to the old ways, to their power. But if you can prove that your way works, that strength doesn't have to mean domination. He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. Kayla stared at him, trying to reconcile the cold king from the throne room with this man who spoke of failure and learning. "And if I can't prove it?" she asked. "If your court tears me apart before I get the chance?" Draven's expression hardened back into the mask she'd first seen. "Then I'll have learned a different lesson about the cost of change." He walked away, leaving Kayla alone with the fire and the wolves and the terrible weight of understanding that she wasn't just fighting for her own survival anymore. She was fighting for an idea that might get them both killed. The capital city of Valdris rose from the plains like a crown of stone and steel. Kayla had never seen anything like it. The walls stretched higher than the tallest trees in her forest, embedded with towers that bristled with archers and siege equipment. Beyond them, buildings climbed toward the sky in impossible layers. Markets, temples, estates, all crowned by the palace itself. A massive structure of black granite and stained glass that looked less like a home and more like a fortress designed to withstand the end of the world. The gates opened as they approached, and the noise hit Kayla like a physical blow. People, thousands of them, crowding the streets, shouting, selling, arguing, living in a chaos so dense she could barely breathe. The smell was overwhelming. Unwashed bodies, cooking meat, horse manure, smoke, perfume, all blending into a miasma that made her eyes water. The wolves pressed closer, sensing her distress. "Easy," she murmured, more to herself than to them. "We're all right. We're fine." The crowd parted as the royal procession moved through the streets, but not out of respect, out of terror. Mothers grabbed their children and pulled them behind market stalls. Merchants abandoned their carts. A priest made a warding gesture and spat on the ground as Kayla passed. She heard the whispers rising like a tide. "That's her, the wolf witch. 25 of them, I heard. Royal Guard, gone feral. She stole them from the king himself. No," she cursed them, turned them against their master. "My brother's in the city guard, says she can kill a man with a look. I heard she drinks blood, bathes in it. That's how she controls them." Kayla kept her eyes forward, jaw clenched, fighting the urge to turn her horse around and run. But there was nowhere to run. The city pressed in on all sides, a maze of stone and suspicion she didn't know how to navigate. A rock flew from the crowd, striking her shoulder. She flinched, and the wolves erupted. Shadow surged forward with a snarl that shook the air, positioning himself between Kayla and the crowd. The other wolves fanned out, teeth bared, a wall of fangs and fury that made the nearest citizens scramble backward in panic. "Stand down!" Draven's voice cracked like a whip. He'd wheeled his horse around, his hand on his sword hilt. "The next person who throws something will hang from the city walls. Is that understood?" Silence fell like a hammer. The king's gaze swept across the crowd, cold and merciless, and Kayla saw people literally shrink under the weight of it. "This woman is under my protection," Draven continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the street. "Any harm that comes to her will be answered as an attack on the crown itself. Spread the word." He turned his horse back toward the palace without waiting for a response. Kayla followed, her heart hammering, acutely aware of the hatred radiating from the crowd like heat from a forge. Shadow fell back into formation beside her, but his hackles remained raised, his eyes scanning for threats. "Thank you," Kayla whispered to him. The wolf's only response was a low, protective growl. They entered the palace grounds through gates that closed behind them with the finality of a prison door. The throne room was vast and cold, built from the same black granite as the exterior, with high vaulted ceilings that swallowed sound and made every footstep echo like a judgment. Courtiers lined the walls, lords and ladies in silk and velvet, their faces painted masks of curiosity and disdain. At the far end, elevated on a dais of polished obsidian, sat a throne carved from a single piece of ancient oak, its armrests shaped like snarling wolves. Draven ascended the steps and turned to face the room. Kayla stood at the base of the dais, flanked by wolves, acutely aware of every eye boring into her. "Lords and ladies of Valdris," Draven's voice carried effortlessly through the chamber, deep and commanding. You've heard the rumors. Now witness the truth. He gestured toward Kayla. This woman sheltered the royal guard during the blizzard that claimed 17 lives across the northern territories. She fed them from her own stores, saved their lives when they were beyond my reach, and dying in conditions that would have killed trained soldiers. His gaze swept across the courtiers. And in doing so, she achieved what no one in 3 centuries has managed. She earned their loyalty without chains, without commands, without force. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Kayla caught fragments. Impossible. Dark magic. Should be executed before she... Can't be trusted. Silence. Draven's single word cut through the noise like a blade. The room went still. I have brought her here to serve the crown. Her abilities will be studied, tested, and, if proven useful, employed for the benefit of the kingdom. Kayla's stomach dropped. Tested. A man stepped forward from the crowd, elderly, draped in robes of deep crimson, with a face like carved granite and eyes that gleamed with predatory intelligence. Everything about him screamed power, manipulation, danger. Your Majesty, he said smoothly, his voice like oil over stone. While your generosity is admirable, surely you understand the danger this woman represents. The Royal Guard's bond is sacred, unbreakable by design. It has protected the throne for generations. If she can sever that bond, she didn't sever it, Lord Corvin. Draven's tone was ice. She shared it. Semantics, my king. The result is the same. 25 of our most elite warriors now answer to an outsider. A peasant. A sit. He paused delicately, his gaze sliding to Kayla with thinly veiled contempt. Wildling with no training, no lineage, no oath of loyalty to the crown. How do we know she won't turn them against us? Against you? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the court. Kayla's hands curled into fists at her sides. I didn't ask for them, she said, her voice cutting through the whispers before she could stop herself. Every eye turned to her. They came to me. I gave them shelter because they were dying. That's all I did. How noble. Lord Corvin's smile was patronizing and vicious. Tell me, girl, when animals bow to you, do you consider yourself their master, or are you merely the puppet of forces you don't understand? I'm not anyone's puppet. No? Corvin turned back to Draven, dismissing her with the gesture. Then let her prove it. Command the wolves to return to you, Your Majesty. If her influence is truly benign, if she's not using dark arts to control them, they'll obey their rightful king without hesitation. The trap snapped shut with brutal efficiency. Kayla's pulse hammered in her ears. Around her the wolves shifted, hackles rising, sensing the tension coiling through the throne room like a living thing. Draven's jaw tightened. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in his expression that looked almost like regret. Then he stood, descended the steps with measured grace, and stopped 10 paces from the wolves. The room held its breath. Return, Draven said, his voice low and commanding, carrying the weight of generations of authority. Stand with your king. The wolves didn't move. Kayla's breath caught. No, please, don't. Draven's eyes narrowed. He raised his hand, the same gesture he'd used at the cabin, the ancient signal every royal wolf had been bred to obey, and barked a sharp command in the old language, words that predated the kingdom itself. The black wolf with the scar, Shadow, took a step forward. For one terrible moment, Kayla thought he would obey. Then Shadow turned his massive head and looked directly at her, and growled. The sound reverberated through the throne room like distant thunder, primal and defiant, and the entire court gasped. Shadow moved to stand between Kayla and the king, his body language unmistakable. Protection, not aggression. Choice, not rebellion. The other wolves followed his lead, forming a tighter circle around Kayla, their message clear to everyone in the room. She was theirs, and they were hers. You see? Corvin's voice dripped triumph, ringing through the shocked silence. The bond is broken. She's turned them into her personal army. This is exactly what I warned about, Your Majesty. She's a threat to the stability of the throne itself. Enough. Draven's voice was quiet, but it silenced Corvin instantly. The king's gaze locked onto Kayla, and in his eyes she saw calculation warring with something she couldn't name. Anger, perhaps, or frustration, or something that looked dangerously close to fascination. The wolves chose her. I will not punish loyalty, no matter how inconvenient. He turned back to the court, and Kayla saw the shift happen in real time, the mask sliding back into place, the king reasserting control. Kayla Thorne will remain in the palace under my direct supervision. She will be given quarters, resources, and access to the royal menagerie. If her abilities extend beyond wolves, we will learn the extent of them. If she proves useful to the crown, she will be rewarded accordingly. His voice dropped, taking on an edge that made several courtiers flinch. If she proves dangerous, she will be dealt with. Swiftly. Is that clear? He didn't wait for an answer. Take her to the East Wing, Draven ordered, addressing one of the guards. Then, almost as an afterthought, he looked at Kayla. The wolves may accompany you, for now. It wasn't mercy. It was a leash disguised as hospitality. Kayla nodded stiffly, not trusting herself to speak, and followed the guard toward the massive doors at the back of the throne room. Behind her, she heard Lord Corvin's voice, low and poisonous. This will not end well, Your Majesty. The girl is a walking disaster. Mark my words. She'll tear this kingdom apart. And Draven's response, equally quiet but carrying a note of steel. Perhaps, but she might also save it. Either way, I intend to find out which. The doors closed behind Kayla with a sound like a tomb sealing. The quarters they gave her were larger than her entire cabin had been. 3 rooms, a bedchamber with a 4-poster bed draped in midnight blue silk, a sitting area with furniture that looked like it cost more than her village's entire annual harvest, and a bathing room with a copper tub big enough to drown in. The furniture was ornate, gilded, clearly expensive. Tapestries covered the walls, depicting hunting scenes and ancient battles. A fireplace dominated one wall, already crackling with fresh logs that filled the room with warmth. It was beautiful. It was suffocating. It was a cage dressed up as luxury. Kayla stood in the center of the sitting room, fist clenched, while the wolves explored the space with cautious curiosity. A few of them sprawled immediately on the plush carpets, exhausted from the journey. Others sniffed at corners, investigating this strange new territory. Shadow remained by her side, his amber eyes fixed on the door as if expecting an attack. I know, she murmured to him, running her hand through his thick fur. I don't trust it either. A sharp knock at the door made her jump, hand instinctively reaching for a weapon she didn't have. Enter, she called, hating how her voice shook. The door opened and a young woman stepped inside. Early 20s, dressed in the simple gray uniform of palace staff with warm brown skin, dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, and eyes that held more sympathy than Kayla had seen since arriving in this stone nightmare. Miss Thorne, the woman's voice was gentle, her posture non-threatening. I'm Mira. I've been assigned as your attendant. She hesitated, glancing at the wolves scattered throughout the room. His Majesty thought you might need help adjusting to palace life. I don't need a babysitter, Kayla said, sharper than she intended. No, Mira agreed easily, not taking offense. But you might need a friend, and possibly someone who knows which fork to use at dinner, because the court will absolutely judge you for getting it wrong. Despite everything, Kayla felt a laugh bubble up. Short, bitter, but real. They're already judging me. Everyone judges everyone here. It's basically the national pastime. Mira stepped further into the room, moving slowly so as not to startle the wolves. One of the younger females, a gray wolf with curious eyes, padded over to sniff her hand. Mira held still, letting the wolf investigate. I grew up on a farm outside the capital, raised horses, goats, chickens, one very stubborn mule named Hector. I'm not afraid of animals. The gray wolf licked Mira's hand, apparently deeming her acceptable. And I'm not afraid of you, Mira added, meeting Kayla's eyes directly. You should be, Kayla said before she could stop herself. Everyone else is. Everyone else is an idiot. Mira crossed the room and began unpacking a basket she'd brought. Fresh bread still warm from the ovens, cheese, fruit, dried meat, a bottle of wine. The court's terrified of anything they can't control or buy or marry into their families. You're new, you're powerful, and you don't fit their rules. Of course they hate you, it's not personal. Well, she paused. Actually, it's completely personal. But it's not about you. It's about what you represent. She set the food on a low table and gestured for Kayla to sit. Change, disruption, the possibility that all their careful politics and alliances and schemes might not mean a damn thing if someone can just walk in and rewrite the rules without even trying. Kayla sank onto the plush couch, suddenly exhausted. I didn't want to rewrite anything, she whispered. I just wanted to be left alone. I wasn't hurting anyone. I was just surviving. Mira poured 2 glasses of wine, the dark liquid catching the firelight. You still are, she said quietly, handing Kayla a glass. Surviving. Just in a different kind of wilderness. One with silk and daggers instead of snow and wolves. She paused. Well, also wolves. But you brought those. Kayla stared at the wine, then at Mira's open, honest face, the first genuinely kind expression she'd seen since entering the city. Why are you being nice to me? Mira sat across from her, considering the question seriously. Because I watched you ride through the city today with your head up and your back straight, even though people were throwing rocks and calling you a monster. Because the wolves chose you, and animals don't lie about who's worth trusting. And because... She took a sip of her wine. I've spent 5 years watching this court destroy good people who didn't deserve it. I'd like to see someone survive for once. Maybe even win. Kayla's throat tightened. What if I can't? What if they're right, and I'm just dangerous? What if I get people killed? Then you'll have that in common with every single lord and lady in this palace, Mira said bluntly. The difference is, you'll actually care. That has to count for something. She raised her glass. To survival, in whatever wilderness we find ourselves. Kayla stared at the glass, at this woman who had no reason to be kind and every reason to protect herself by keeping distance. Then she clinked her glass against Mira's. To survival. The wine was good, better than anything Kayla had ever tasted. It warmed her from the inside, loosening some of the tension that had been coiled in her chest since the throne room. So, Mira said, settling back with her own glass, tomorrow you're supposed to meet with the master of the menagerie. Word is the king wants to see if you can do with other animals what you did with the wolves. What if I can't? Then you tell him that honestly and hope he respects the truth more than he needs a miracle. Mira's expression turned more serious. But Kayla, if you can do something, if you can help those animals, don't hold back because you're afraid of what it might mean. The court will find a reason to fear you regardless. Might as well give them a real one. Kayla nodded slowly, the weight of tomorrow already pressing down on her shoulders. They talked for another hour, Mira explaining the basic structure of court politics, who to avoid, who might be neutral, which servants were trustworthy. It was overwhelming, a maze of names and alliances and unspoken rules that made Kayla's head spin. But it was also the first time since leaving her cabin that she felt like someone was actually trying to help her survive this. When Mira finally left, promising to return in the morning, Kayla stood at the window overlooking the city. Lights sparkled below like fallen stars. Somewhere out there, people were going about their lives, unaware or uncaring that a girl from the frontier had just become a piece in a game she didn't understand. Shadow pressed against her leg, solid and warm. What have I gotten us into? She whispered. The wolf had no answer, but he stayed, and that was enough. The first test came 3 days later. Kayla spent those days in a strange limbo, confined to her quarters except for supervised excursions to walk the wolves in a secure courtyard, eating meals delivered by silent servants, and avoiding the stares of passing courtiers who made no effort to hide their disgust. Mira visited daily, teaching her basic etiquette and court protocols, though they both knew it wouldn't be enough. You can't make them like you, Mira said on the second day, helping Kayla navigate the nightmare that was court dress. So don't try, just be yourself. The wolves trust you. Hold on to that. On the morning of the third day, a guard arrived with summons from the king. His Majesty requests your presence at the royal menagerie, immediately. Kayla's stomach dropped, but she nodded and followed. The royal menagerie was a sprawling complex on the palace grounds, partially hidden behind high walls and ancient oak trees. As they approached, Kayla heard sounds that made her skin crawl. Roars, screams, the rattle of chains, the desperate calls of creatures in distress. The headkeeper, A grizzled man named Torvin, with scars covering both arms and a face that suggested he'd stopped caring about anything years ago, met her at the entrance with an expression that made it clear he'd rather be anywhere else. "You're the wolf girl," he said flatly, not a question. "Kayla. Don't care what your name is. Don't care where you came from. His Majesty says you've got away with beasts. We'll see about that." He turned and started walking, not checking to see if she followed. "Try not to get yourself killed. Paperwork's a nightmare." Shadow and 3 other wolves had accompanied her. They moved close, hackles raised, sensing the wrongness of this place. Torvin led her through rows of enclosures, lions pacing behind iron bars worn smooth from years of bodies, throwing themselves against them, bears chained to stone pillars with just enough slack to stand but never run, eagles with clipped wings huddled on perches in cages barely large enough to spread their wings. The air stank of captivity and misery and old blood. Kayla's hands clenched into fists. "What do you do with them?" she asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "War," Torvin said simply, as if that explained everything. "The lions get released in battle to scatter enemy lines. The bears are trained to charge shield formations. The eagles scout and carry messages." He stopped in front of a massive cage at the far end of the complex, set apart from the others. "This one, though? This one's useless." Inside the cage was a creature Kayla had only seen in stories told around winter fires. A griffin, half eagle, half lion, with golden feathers that should have gleamed in the sunlight and a mane like molten bronze. It should have been magnificent, awe-inspiring, the kind of creature legends were built around. Instead, it was broken. The griffin huddled in the corner of the cage, wings tucked tight against its body, head low. Its feathers were dull, matted with filth and crusted with old blood. One of its legs was scarred from repeated chaining, deep grooves in the flesh that had healed badly. Its eyes, which should have been fierce and golden, were clouded with pain and resignation. It had given up. Kayla's chest tightened with fury so intense she could barely breathe. "Found him as a juvenile in the western mountains," Torvin continued, oblivious or indifferent to her reaction. "Thought we could train him for aerial combat. Griffins are worth their weight in gold if you can break them properly. But he's violent, unpredictable. Attacked 3 handlers before we gave up trying. We've kept him locked up for 2 years, waiting for the king to decide if he's worth feeding or if we should just put him down." "You broke him," Kayla said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. Torvin's eyes narrowed. "We tried to train him. There's a difference." "No," Kayla said coldly, turning to face him fully. "There isn't. You took something wild and free and tried to force it into submission. And when it fought back, when it refused to let you destroy who it was, you called it a failure and locked it in a cage to rot." "It's an animal," Torvin said dismissively. "A dangerous one." "It's a prisoner, and you're the monster, not him." Torvin's face flushed red. "Listen here, girl. I'm done listening." Kayla turned back to the cage and stepped toward it. "What the hell are you doing?" Torvin grabbed her arm. "He'll rip you apart the moment you get close enough." Kayla shook him off with more force than she knew she had. "Then maybe I'll deserve it for being part of this." She kept walking, her heart pounding, every instinct screaming at her to run, but something deeper, something that understood broken things, pulling her forward. The griffin's head snapped up as she approached. Its eyes, gold beneath the clouded pain, locked onto her with an intensity that stole her breath. A low, warning screech echoed through the menagerie, a sound that spoke of fury and anguish and years of suffering. Kayla stopped at the bars and slowly, carefully, lowered herself to her knees. "I know," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know what they did to you. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. They took everything from you and called it training." The griffin's beak opened, revealing rows of sharp teeth designed to tear through flesh and bone. Its wings rustled, the damaged feathers catching the light. Kayla didn't flinch. "But you're not useless. You're not broken. You're just—" Her voice cracked. "You're just caged. And I know, I understand that better than anyone here." She reached through the bars, palm open, fingers trembling but steady. "You don't have to trust me. You don't have to like me. But I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not here to train you or use you or turn you into a weapon." Tears streamed down her face. "I'm here to see you," really see you, not as something to break, not as a failure, just as who you are, as who you were meant to be before they took that away. For a long moment, nothing happened. The griffin stared at her, head tilted, processing her words with an intelligence that was almost human. Then, slowly, so slowly that Kayla held her breath, it moved. It crossed the cage cautiously, every muscle coiled and ready to strike. It stopped just beyond her reach, head tilted, studying her with eyes that had forgotten what kindness looked like. And then it stepped forward and pressed its beak against her outstretched palm. The touch was feather-light, tentative, trusting. Kayla's breath hitched, and the tears came harder. Behind her, she heard Torvin's sharp intake of breath, heard him mutter something that sounded like a curse or a prayer. The griffin pulled back, and for the first time since she'd seen it, the creature spread its wings, huge and golden, even in their neglected state, scarred and torn, but still capable of flight, still holding the memory of freedom. It let out a cry that wasn't rage or pain. It was defiance. It was hope. Kayla stood on shaking legs, turned to face Torvin, and met his shocked gaze with steel in her own. "Let him out! Are you insane? He's dangerous. He'll kill you the moment he's angry. There's a difference." She stepped closer, voice dropping to something dangerous and absolute. "You want to know what I can do? Fine. Let him out. Give him space to breathe, to fly, to exist as something other than your prisoner. And if he attacks me, you can tell the king I failed. You can tell him I got exactly what I deserved." Torvin stared at her like she'd grown a second head, like she was the most reckless, foolish person he'd ever met. Then slowly he pulled a ring of keys from his belt. "Your funeral," he muttered, but his hand shook as he approached the lock. The key turned. The lock clicked open. The door swung wide. The griffin didn't move. It stood frozen, staring at the open door like it was a trick, a test, another way to inflict pain. Kayla walked into the cage, heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to move slowly, calmly, to project a confidence she didn't feel. "Come on," she said gently, extending her hand again. "Let's get you out of here. Let's get you free." The griffin hesitated, its gaze moving between her and the open door, between captivity and the possibility of something else. Then it took a step, and another, and another. It walked past Kayla, through the door, and out into the open air of the menagerie yard. For a moment it just stood there, blinking in the sunlight like a creature emerging from a tomb. Then it screamed, a sound of pure, unfiltered joy that echoed across the palace grounds, and launched itself into the sky. It was clumsy at first, wings struggling to remember how to catch air after years of disuse, muscles weak from confinement. But with each beat, each desperate climb toward the clouds, it grew stronger. The griffin soared higher and higher, a golden shape against the blue, and Kayla watched with tears streaming down her face as it remembered what it meant to be free. Several courtiers had gathered, drawn by the commotion. She heard gasps, shocked whispers, someone calling for guards. And then the griffin circled back. It descended in a spiral, wings spread wide, and landed beside Kayla with surprising grace. It folded its wings, lowered its head until its beak touched her shoulder in a gesture she recognized from the wolves, a gesture of gratitude, of connection, of choice. The griffin chirped, a surprisingly gentle sound from such a powerful creature, and settled beside her, content to stay. "You're free now," Kayla whispered, stroking its feathers, feeling the fierce heartbeat beneath her palm. "You hear me? You're free. You can go anywhere. You don't owe me anything." But the griffin pressed closer, making it clear that freedom included the freedom to choose who to trust. Across the yard, Torvin stood frozen, mouth hanging open. "I'll be damned," he breathed. "I'll be absolutely damned." Word spread through the palace like wildfire. Servants running to tell lords who told ladies, who told their attendants until the story had grown into myth before sunset. By evening, every person in Valdris knew the same impossible truth. The wolf witch had tamed a griffin that 3 trained handlers couldn't break. And in the throne room, King Draven listened to the reports with an expression that revealed nothing and everything. Lord Corvin stood beside the throne, his face twisted with barely contained rage. "She's more dangerous than we thought, Your Majesty. First the wolves, now this. If she can subvert any creature, she didn't subvert anything, Draven interrupted, his gaze distant, thoughtful. She freed it, and it chose to stay. That's the same thing. No, Lord Corvin, it's not. Draven stood, walked to the window, and looked out toward the menagerie where a golden shape circled in the fading light. She's more valuable than we thought, he said quietly, and that makes her infinitely more dangerous. He turned back to Corvin, his expression cold and calculating. Double the guards outside her quarters. I want to know everyone she speaks to, everywhere she goes, everything she does. If she's going to change the rules, I need to understand how, and I need to decide if I'm going to let her. Corvin bowed stiffly. And if you decide you won't, Your Majesty? Draven's silence was answer enough. That night, Kayla couldn't sleep. She stood on the balcony outside her chambers, wrapped in a borrowed cloak, staring out at the sprawling city below. The wolves dozed in a pile near the door. The griffin, she'd started calling him Valor in her mind, perched on the balcony railing, preening his feathers with careful attention. She felt like a fraud. These people thought she had power, control, some kind of mystical gift that let her command beasts. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. She just listened. She saw animals as they were, not as what people wanted them to be. She recognized the pain of captivity because she'd lived it. She understood the hunger for freedom because she'd spent her entire life fighting for it. And somehow, impossibly, that was enough. But how long before someone tested her too far? How long before she failed, and the wolves turned on her, and Draven decided she was more trouble than she was worth? How long before they found a cage strong enough to hold her? You're thinking too loud. Kayla spun. King Draven stood in the doorway to her chambers, dressed simply in dark linen, his crown conspicuously absent. He looked younger without it, almost human. The wolves hadn't even stirred at his entrance. They knew his scent, recognized him as pack even if they no longer obeyed him. How did you... The guards are mine. And I told them I was coming. He stepped onto the balcony, keeping a respectful distance. You did well today, with the griffin, with Valor. You know his name? I listened at the door while you named him. Old habit. Draven leaned against the railing, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. You're terrified. Of this place. Of me. Of what comes next. It wasn't a question. Wouldn't you be? Kayla asked quietly. Yes. His honesty surprised her. But I'd also know that showing that fear would get me killed faster than anything else. The court respects strength. They'll forgive arrogance, cruelty, even incompetence, but they'll destroy perceived weakness without mercy. Then they'll destroy me, because I'm not strong. You freed a griffin with your bare hands and no training. You saved 25 royal wolves from a blizzard that killed 17 people. You've survived alone in the mountains for years. Draven turned to look at her fully. Don't confuse fear with weakness. They're not the same thing. Kayla wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the cloak. Why did you really come here tonight? Draven was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving to Valor, who watched him with unblinking golden eyes. Because tomorrow, I'm taking you to the war kennels. There's a beast there that even Torvin won't approach. Something we captured during a border raid 6 months ago, a creature from the deep forest that's killed 4 handlers and injured a dozen more. Lord Corvin is petitioning for its destruction. He paused. He's also petitioning for yours. Kayla's blood ran cold. So this is a test. Everything here is a test. Draven's expression hardened. If you can reach that creature, if you can prove your ability isn't limited to wolves and griffins, Corvin loses his argument. You become too valuable to eliminate. You buy yourself time, protection, a place in this world. And if I can't? Draven's eyes met hers, and she saw the truth there before he spoke it. Then I'll have no choice but to agree with him. That you're too dangerous to live, that the risk outweighs the potential reward. The words hung between them like a blade. You'd kill me. Kayla's voice was hollow. I'd have you imprisoned, exiled, sent somewhere you couldn't threaten the stability of the throne. He straightened. But yes, if it came to it, and you left me no other choice, I would order your execution, just like I've ordered hundreds of others who threatened this kingdom. At least he was honest. Get some rest, Draven said, turning toward the door. Tomorrow will require all your strength, all your courage. Whatever it is you do, Whatever connection you have with these creatures, you'll need every bit of it. He paused in the doorway. Prove Corvin wrong, Kayla. Prove you're not a threat to be eliminated, but a force to be respected. Show them what I saw in that cabin, someone who doesn't command through fear, but through understanding. And if that's not enough? Draven's smile was sad and sharp. Then we'll both have learned an important lesson about the limits of change in a world built on control. He left, the door closing softly behind him. Kayla stood alone on the balcony, heart pounding, as Valor chirped softly and Shadow pressed against her leg. She was walking a knife's edge between survival and destruction, between becoming something this kingdom needed and something it would destroy to protect itself. And tomorrow that edge would become even sharper. She had one chance to prove she belonged here. One chance to save not just herself, but every creature trapped in cages throughout this city. One chance to show them that strength didn't have to mean domination. And if she failed, the girl the wild chose would become just another cautionary tale. Another example of what happened when you tried to change a world that didn't want to be changed. Kayla looked out at the sleeping city, at the darkness beyond the walls, and made a silent promise to the mountains that had raised her, to the cabin that had sheltered her, to the life she'd left behind. She would survive this. No matter what it cost. She would survive this. No matter what it cost. But when dawn came, cold and gray through her window, Kayla wondered if survival was even possible anymore. Mira arrived early, her face drawn with worry, carrying a tray of food Kayla had no appetite for. "The whole palace is talking," Mira said quietly, setting down the tray, "about what you're going to face today, about the creature in the war kennels." "What is it?" Kayla asked, pulling on the leather boots Mira had brought her, more practical than the silk slippers the palace had provided. Mira hesitated. "They call it a shadow beast. Captured during a raid on a village near the Thornwood, the deep forest where the trees grow so thick that sunlight never touches the ground. The soldiers said it killed half their unit before they managed to trap it. It's been in the kennels for 6 months, and no one can get within 10 feet without it trying to tear them apart. Has anyone tried to understand why it's violent?" "Understanding isn't the point." Mira's voice was bitter. "Control is. Breaking is. The king's war beasts aren't partners, they're weapons. And weapons that won't be wielded get destroyed." Kayla stood, checking that her clothes were secure, that her hair was tied back. Shadow and 4 other wolves waited by the door, sensing her tension. "Kayla," Mira said softly, "Lord Corvin has been spreading rumors. He's told half the court that you're using dark magic, that you've made pacts with 4 spirits, that the creatures only obey you because you've enslaved them with blood rituals. That's insane. Doesn't matter if it's true. It matters if people believe it." Mira grabbed her hand. "He wants you to fail today. He needs you to fail. Because if you succeed, if you prove that there's another way to reach these creatures, it undermines everything the war kennels represent. Everything he represents. Then I won't fail. And if the creature kills you," Kayla met her friend's eyes steadily, "then at least I'll die being myself instead of what they want me to be." Mira pulled her into a fierce hug. "You're the bravest idiot I've ever met." "I'll take that as a compliment." When they pulled apart, Mira pressed something into Kayla's hand, a small carved wooden wolf, worn smooth with age. "My father made this for me when I was little. He said wolves know the difference between predators and protectors. They know who to trust." She closed Kayla's fingers around it. "Trust yourself today. Trust what you know. And come back alive so I can tell you I told you so." Kayla tucked the carving into her pocket, feeling its weight like a promise. "I'll try." The war kennels were separate from the menagerie, hidden behind the palace's training grounds in a structure that looked more like a fortress than an animal enclosure. Armed guards flanked the entrance. The walls were reinforced stone 20 feet high, with archer posts at regular intervals. Whatever was inside, they'd built this place to contain it. King Draven was already there, along with Torvin, Lord Corvin, and a crowd of courtiers who'd apparently decided that watching Kayla potentially get torn apart was excellent morning entertainment. "Miss Thorne," Draven's greeting was formal, his expression unreadable. "Are you prepared?" "No," Kayla said honestly, "but I'm here anyway." A ripple of shocked whispers ran through the crowd. Apparently honesty wasn't typical court behavior. Lord Corvin stepped forward, his smile sharp as broken glass. Your Majesty, I must protest this foolishness. The Shadow Beast is beyond redemption. We've lost 4 good men trying to train it. Allowing this girl to attempt the same is simply throwing away a life. How thoughtful of you to care about my life, Lord Corvin, Kayla said before Draven could respond. I'm sure it has nothing to do with wanting to see me fail. Corvin's eyes flashed with rage, but his smile never wavered. My concern is for the kingdom's safety. If you die today, those wolves and that griffin become unpredictable variables, dangerous ones. Then let's make sure I don't die. Draven raised a hand, cutting off Corvin's response. The rules are simple. You will enter the containment area alone. No weapons, no wolves, no assistance. If the Shadow Beast can be reached, prove it. If not, he didn't finish the sentence. Kayla's throat went dry. How long do I have? As long as it takes, or until you're dead. Draven's voice was cold, emotionless. Whichever comes first. He gestured to Torvin, who reluctantly approached a massive iron door set into the stone wall. Last chance to back out, Torvin muttered, hand on the lock. No shame in admitting you're in over your head. There's plenty of shame, Kayla said quietly. Just not in trying. She turned to Shadow and the other wolves. Stay here. Don't follow me. No matter what you hear. Shadow whined, pressing against her leg. I know, but I need to do this alone. She knelt, buried her face in his fur for a moment. Trust me. The wolf huffed but settled back, though his eyes never left her. Kayla stood, faced the door, and nodded. Torvin opened it. The smell hit her first, blood, fear, and something else. Something wild and ancient and wrong, like the scent of a storm before it breaks. Kayla stepped through. The door slammed shut behind her with a finality that shook her bones. The containment area was a circular pit, maybe 40 feet across, with smooth stone walls too high to climb. The floor was dirt, stained dark with old blood. Bones littered the edges, animal bones, she hoped, though some looked disturbingly large. And in the center, chained to a stone pillar with links of iron as thick as her wrist, was the Shadow Beast. It was like nothing Kayla had ever seen. Roughly the size of a large bear, it moved with fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so massive. Its body was covered in midnight black fur that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. 6 legs. 6. Ending in claws that had carved deep gouges into the stone floor. Its head was wolf-like, but wrong, with too many teeth and eyes that glowed a sick yellow-green in the dim light. It was a predator designed by Nightmare. The creature's head swung toward her, and the sound it made, a low, resonant growl that vibrated in her chest, was pure, concentrated hatred. Kayla forced herself to breathe, to think. They captured it near Thornwood, killed its pack probably, chained it in darkness for 6 months, tried to break it through pain and starvation. Of course it was violent. She took a step forward. The Shadow Beast exploded into motion, surging against its chains with such force that the pillar cracked. Its jaws snapped inches from where Kayla had been standing, teeth like daggers gleaming with saliva. She stumbled backward, heart hammering. Above, she heard the crowd gasp, heard Corvin's voice, smug and satisfied. Perhaps 30 seconds before it tears her apart. Any wagers? Kayla's hands clenched into fists. No, not like this. She forced herself to stand still, to stop retreating, even as every instinct screamed at her to run. I know, she said, her voice shaking but clear. I know you want to kill me. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. The Shadow Beast lunged again, chains rattling, claws scraping stone. Kayla didn't move. They took you from your home, killed your pack, locked you in darkness and tried to turn you into a weapon. Her voice grew stronger. They did the same thing to me. Not with chains, maybe, but with fear, with isolation, with the certainty that I'd never belong anywhere. The creature paused, head tilted, those terrible eyes fixed on her. You don't know me. You don't trust me. Why would you? Kayla took a step forward, just one, trembling but deliberate. But I'm not them. I'm not here to break you or use you or turn you into something you're not. Another step. The Shadow Beast's growl deepened, a warning that rumbled like distant thunder. I'm here because I understand what it's like to be caged, to have people look at you and see a monster instead of someone who's just trying to survive. Another step. She was within reach of its claws now. One swipe would end her. So here's what I'm offering. Kayla's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I can't give you back what you lost. I can't undo what they did. But I can see you, really see you, not as a beast or a weapon or a mistake. She slowly, carefully, lowered herself to her knees, just as someone who deserves better than this. For a long moment, nothing happened. The shadow beast stared at her, breathing hard, muscles coiled. Then something shifted in those alien eyes. Recognition. Not of her, but of the truth she was speaking. The creature took a step forward, not lunging, not attacking, just approaching. It lowered its massive head until it was level with hers, close enough that she could feel its breath, hot and rank. Close enough to kill her without effort. Kayla raised her hand, palm open, exactly as she had with the griffin. Your choice, she whispered. Always your choice. The shadow beast's jaws opened, revealing those terrible teeth, and it pressed its forehead against her palm. The contact sent a shock through Kayla's entire body, not painful, but intense. Images flooded her mind. Deep forests, running with a pack under moonlight, the terror of nets and fire and screaming, the endless dark of captivity, the pain of chains, the rage of being treated like a thing instead of a being. Tears streamed down her face. I'm sorry, she choked out. I'm so sorry they did this to you. The shadow beast made a sound, not a growl this time, but something softer, almost a whine. It was crying. This creature that had killed 4 men and terrified an entire kingdom was crying because someone had finally acknowledged its pain. Kayla wrapped her arms around its massive neck, buried her face in its fur, and wept with it. Above, the crowd was completely silent. Then she heard Torven's voice, rough with shock. She's hugging it. And Lord Corvin, his voice sharp with desperation. It's a trick. Some kind of sedation spell. Your Majesty, you can't possibly. Silence. Draven's single word cut through everything. Open the door. Now. Your Majesty. Now. The door opened. Kayla pulled back, looking into the shadow beast's eyes. Will you come with me? Not as a prisoner, not as a weapon, just as yourself? The creature rumbled, a sound that might have been agreement. Kayla stood on shaking legs and turned to face Torvin. Get these chains off, all of them. Are you insane? The chains, now. Something in her voice, some authority she didn't know she possessed, made Torvin actually obey. He approached cautiously, keys rattling in his trembling hands, and began unlocking the shackles. The shadow beast stood perfectly still, letting him work. When the last chain fell away, the creature shook itself, stretched muscles that had been confined for too long, and then it walked to Kayla's side and sat, just like a dog, like it had been waiting 6 months for someone to ask instead of command. Kayla walked toward the door, and the shadow beast followed, massive and deadly and completely docile. She emerged into the morning light, and the crowd actually gasped. Shadow and the other wolves immediately surrounded her, hackles raised, protective. But they didn't attack the shadow beast. They recognized something in it, something familiar, another outcast, another survivor. Draven stood frozen, his expression caught between shock and something that looked almost like awe. Lord Corvin's face was purple with rage. This proves nothing. She's obviously using dark magic. No natural person could... Enough! So Draven's voice was quiet, but it carried absolute authority. Lord Corvin, you will cease these accusations immediately. Your Majesty, I must protest. Then protest in writing and submit it to the council. But you will not... Draven stepped forward, his gaze cold and merciless. You will not question what I have witnessed with my own eyes. Is that understood? Corvin's jaw worked, but he bowed stiffly. As you command, Your Majesty. But his eyes, when they landed on Kayla, promised murder. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Kayla was taken back to her quarters, the shadow beast following peacefully, where Mira fell on her with relief and recriminations. You hugged a creature that killed 4 people. You hugged it. It needed a hug. You're insane. Completely, utterly insane. But Mira was crying as she said it, clutching Kayla like she might disappear. Word spread through the city faster than fire. The wolf witch had tamed the untamable, had walked into certain death and emerged with a monster at her heels. The stories grew with each telling. She'd wrestled the beast barehanded, had sung it to sleep with magic songs, had made pacts with forest spirits. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter as much as perception. That night, Draven summoned her to a private audience, just the two of them in a small chamber off the throne room. "You've made yourself indispensable," he said without preamble, "and incredibly dangerous. I just listened to a creature in pain. You defied every principle this kingdom's military power is built on." He poured 2 glasses of wine, handed her one. "For 300 years, we've controlled beasts through dominance, through breaking their will and rebuilding them as weapons. You walked in and proved there's another way. A better way." "Then why do you look angry about it?" Draven took a long drink. "Because change is dangerous. Because every noble in this court who's built their power on the current system now sees you as a threat. And because—" He paused. "Because I'm not sure I can protect you from what's coming." "What do you mean?" "Corvin isn't alone. He has allies, powerful ones. Lords who profit from war, from conquest, from a kingdom that values strength over wisdom." Draven set down his glass. "They'll come for you, Kayla. Not openly, not directly, but they'll find a way. An accident, a poisoned meal, a tragic training incident." Kayla's blood ran cold. "So what do I do?" "You become too valuable to lose." Draven stepped closer. "I'm creating a new position, Royal Beastmaster. You'll have authority over the menagerie, the war kennels, everything. You'll train handlers in your methods. You'll transform how this kingdom approaches animal warfare. You're making me part of the system. I'm making you essential to it. It's the only way to keep you alive." Kayla wanted to refuse, wanted to run back to her cabin in the mountains and pretend none of this had happened. But she thought of Valor, finally able to fly, of the shadow beast, freed from chains, of all the creatures still suffering in cages throughout the kingdom. "I want full authority," she said. "No more chaining, no more cages smaller than the animal's needs, no more breaking through starvation." "Agreed. And I want the creatures to have choices. If they don't want to fight, they don't fight." Draven's jaw tightened. "That could cripple our military capacity. Or it could create warriors who fight because they want to, not because they're forced to. Which do you think would be more effective?" He stared at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Respect, perhaps, or the beginning of it. "You drive a hard bargain for someone with no leverage. I have plenty of leverage. 25 wolves, a griffin, and a shadow beast who'd tear this palace apart if something happened to me. Is that a threat?" "It's a fact." Kayla met his eyes steadily. "I don't want power, Your Majesty. I don't want politics or games or whatever else happens in this court. I just want to help the creatures who can't help themselves. If that makes me valuable to you, fine, but I won't compromise who I am to do it." Draven's lips quirked into something that might have been a smile. "You know what the most dangerous thing about you is, Kayla Thorne?" "What?" "You're honest. In a court built on lies and manipulation, you're aggressively, brutally honest. It's like watching someone walk through a room full of vipers wearing nothing but conviction." "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation." He extended his hand. "Do we have an agreement? Royal Beastmaster, full authority, your conditions accepted?" Kayla looked at his hand, at the king who'd threatened her life just yesterday and was now offering her power. She thought of every creature still suffering, every wolf, bear, lion, eagle trapped in cages and chains. She shook his hand. "We have an agreement." For 3 weeks, things almost seemed stable. Kayla threw herself into her new role with fierce dedication. She spent every day at the menagerie and war kennels, assessing conditions, implementing changes, earning the trust of creatures that had known only cruelty. Slowly, painfully, progress happened. Mira became her constant companion and ally, helping navigate court politics, while Kyla focused on the animals. The wolves integrated into palace life with surprising ease, though they still chose Kayla over everyone else. Valor became a fixture of the sky above Valdris, his golden form a symbol that change was possible. And the shadow beast, Kayla had named him Shade, never left her side. The court remained divided. Some nobles began to see the value in her methods. Others, led by Lord Corvin, watched her with barely concealed hatred. But Kayla had Draven's protection, his explicit endorsement. She thought that might be enough. She was wrong. The attack came on the night of the winter solstice, during the grand feast that marked the year's darkest day. Kayla had been reluctant to attend. Crowds still made her skin crawl. But Draven had insisted. You need to be seen, to be accepted as part of the court. So she'd let Mira dress her in a gown of deep forest green, had braided her hair with silver thread, had walked into the great hall with her head high, even as whispers followed her. The feast was overwhelming. Hundreds of nobles, endless courses of food, music that was too loud, conversation that was too false. Kayla sat at the high table near Draven, picking at her plate, counting the minutes until she could escape. Lord Corvin was there, at the far end of the table, his eyes tracking her every movement. You're doing well, Draven murmured beside her. They're watching you, but no one's fleeing in terror. Progress. I feel like a trained bear at a circus. At least you're not in a cage. Kayla was about to respond when the doors to the great hall burst open. A soldier stumbled in, armor dented, blood streaming from a gash on his head. Your Majesty! His voice cracked with panic. The border town of Millhaven, it's under attack! The hall went silent. Draven stood. What kind of attack? Raiders, sire. 50 men, maybe more. They've already breached the walls. The garrison sent word before the messenger towers fell. They're requesting immediate reinforcement. How long ago? 3 hours, Your Majesty. 3 hours. Millhaven was a 4-hour ride at top speed. By the time reinforcements arrived, it would be over. Draven's face went hard. Marshal the cavalry. I want every available soldier ready to ride in 20 minutes. Your Majesty. Kayla stood, her voice cutting through the chaos. Let me go! The entire hall turned to stare at her. Absolutely not, Draven said flatly. You're not a soldier. No, but I have something better. She looked at him steadily. Let me take the wolves. Valor, Shade. We can move faster than cavalry, hit harder, and I can call other creatures from the forest. We can buy time for your soldiers to arrive. You're talking about riding into active combat with animals. I'm talking about saving lives. Kayla's voice rose. Those people don't have 4 hours. They barely have one. And sitting here debating while they die isn't an option. Lord Corvin surged to his feet. Your Majesty, this is exactly the kind of reckless... She's right. Draven's voice was cold. Millhaven won't survive a conventional response. Jinasita Uar. He turned to Kayla, and she saw the war happening behind his eyes. Duty versus caution, desperation versus reason. If I allow this, he said quietly, and you fail, Corvin will use it as proof that your methods are too dangerous, that you're too dangerous. There won't be a third chance. Then I won't fail. You could die. People are dying now. Draven stared at her, and for a moment she saw past the king to the man underneath. Someone who understood impossible choices, who carried the weight of every decision. Go, he said finally. Take whatever you need. Save them if you can. Kayla turned and ran from the hall, Mira's voice chasing after her. I'm coming with you. No. Someone needs to treat the wounded. You know healing animals, not people. There was no time to argue. 20 minutes later, Kayla rode out of Valdris on horseback, flanked by 25 wolves, with Valor circling overhead and Shade running alongside. Mira clung to her own horse, a medical pack strapped to her back. They rode into the night, into the unknown, into the desperate gamble that would either prove Kayla's methods worked or destroy her completely. They reached Millhaven in just over 2 hours, the horses pushed to their limits, the wolves running tirelessly. What Kayla saw stopped her heart. The town was burning. Buildings collapsed in showers of sparks. Screams echoed through smoke-filled streets. Raiders in mismatched armor dragged people from their homes, swords wet with blood. And the garrison, what was left of it, had barricaded themselves in the town center, surrounded, outnumbered, dying. Kayla pulled her horse to a halt on the ridge overlooking the town. This is insane, Mira breathed beside her. There are too many. I know. Kayla's hands shook on the reins. But we're what they have. She closed her eyes and did something she'd never tried before. She called, not with her voice, with something deeper. The same instinct that had brought the wolves to her cabin, that had connected her to valor and shade. She called to every predator within miles, every wolf, every bear, every creature that understood territory and pack and the defense of home. Come, fight with me. Protect. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the forest exploded. Wolves poured from the trees, not her 25, but dozens more, wild and fierce. Bears emerged from dens, roaring. Mountain lions materialized from shadow. Even a pack of wild boars, tusks gleaming, charged toward the town. Mira stared in shock. What did you do? Something probably very stupid. Kayla drew a shaky breath. Stay here. Find the wounded when it's safe. Don't be a hero, I know. Mira grabbed her hand. Don't you be one either. Come back alive. Kayla squeezed her hand once, then raised her voice to the assembled animals. Anyone who surrenders, we leave alone. Anyone who fights, we stop. Anyone who harms innocents, her voice turned cold. We end. Shadow growled agreement, and the other creatures responded in kind. A chorus of snarls and roars that shook the night. Kayla kicked her horse forward and led an army of the wild into hell. The raiders never saw them coming. The wolves hit first, a wave of fur and fangs that tore through the raiders' rear lines. Men screamed, weapons clattered, formations shattered. The bears followed, massive and unstoppable, scattering anyone who tried to hold ground. Valor dove from the sky, talons raking across faces, wings buffeting raiders off their feet. And Shade. Shade became the nightmare the raiders would see for the rest of their shortened lives. The shadow beast moved through the chaos like death itself, six-legged and impossibly fast, taking down anyone who raised a weapon. Not killing unless necessary, but incapacitating, breaking weapon hands, severing tendons, leaving raiders alive but unable to continue fighting. Kayla rode through the center of it all, directing the chaos, calling orders that the animals somehow understood and obeyed. Left flank, drive them toward the garrison. Protect the civilians, get them to the town square. Someone's trying to set fire to the granary. Stop them. It was working. Against all logic, against all odds, it was working. The raiders, expecting helpless villagers and an overwhelmed garrison, found themselves facing a coordinated assault of predators that fought with purpose and strategy. They broke. Some threw down their weapons, others ran. The rest fought with desperate fury until the wolves or Shade or Kayla's impossible army brought them down. Within an hour, it was over. The raiders who survived were corralled in the town square, surrounded by growling wolves and watchful bears. The garrison emerged from their barricade, weapons raised, shock written across their faces. Kayla dismounted on shaking legs, her dress torn and blood-splattered, not hers, thank the stars, and approached the garrison captain, a grizzled woman with a scar bisecting her left eyebrow. Reinforcements from Valdris, Kayla said, her voice hoarse. The king's cavalry is 4 hours behind us. The captain stared at her, at the wolves, at Shade, who sat calmly beside Kayla despite being covered in blood. You're the wolf witch, she said finally. I'm Kayla Thorne, royal beastmaster. You just saved our town with an army of animals. Yes, the captain blinked. Then slowly she dropped to one knee. Millhaven owes you a debt we can never repay. Around her, the surviving garrison followed suit. Then the townspeople, those who'd survived, emerged from hiding and knelt as well. Kayla stared at them, overwhelmed, terrified, not understanding. And then Mira was there, pulling her into a fierce hug. You did it, she whispered. You actually did it. Kayla held on to her friend and tried to process what had just happened. She'd led creatures into battle, had called an army from the wild, had proven that her methods worked not just in controlled environments, but in the chaos of real combat. She'd become exactly what Draven needed her to be, and exactly what Lord Corvin feared most. When Draven arrived 4 hours later with the cavalry, he found Millhaven secure, the raiders imprisoned, the wounded being tended by Mira and the town's healers, and Kayla sitting against a half-burned building with Shade's massive head in her lap. He dismounted slowly, his gaze sweeping across the scene, the wolves resting among the townspeople, the bears drinking from the town well, Valor perched on the roof of the grain house. Then he looked at Kyla, and she saw something in his expression shift. Not just respect, recognition. He crossed to her, knelt, and spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. "You've just changed everything. You know that, right?" Kayla was too exhausted to do anything but nod. "When word of this spreads, and it will spread, every kingdom on the continent will either want to recruit you or eliminate you." His voice was grim. "You've proven that one person with your abilities can turn the tide of battle. That's not just valuable. That's dangerous. I just wanted to save people." "I know, but you've done more than that." Draven stood, offering his hand. "You've become a weapon. The question now is whether you'll be my weapon or someone else's." Kayla stared at his hand, understanding the choice he was offering. Safety and service, protection and obligation, survival and surrender. She took his hand and let him pull her up. "I'm no one's weapon," she said quietly, "but I'll be your ally, your partner, if you swear to let me do this my way. Even if your way gets you killed, especially then." Draven studied her face, then nodded slowly. "Then we have an understanding, Kayla Thorne." He raised his voice, addressing the assembled crowd. "This woman, by her courage and skill, has saved Millhaven from destruction. She will be honored as a hero of the realm, and granted—" An arrow took him in the shoulder. The world seemed to slow as Draven staggered, blood blooming across his shirt, as chaos erupted, as guards rushed to surround him, as another arrow whistled past Kayla's head and embedded itself in the wall behind her. Kayla spun, scanning for the source. There. A rooftop. A figure in dark clothes, bow raised. And beside the archer, directing, pointing. "Lord Corvin." Her blood turned to ice. Shade roared, surging to his feet. The wolves scattered into attack formation. Valor screamed from the sky. But Corvin and his assassin were already running, disappearing into the maze of buildings. "Protect the king!" someone shouted. Guards formed a wall around Draven, who was conscious but bleeding, his face pale with shock and pain. Kayla made a split-second decision. She ran after Corvin. Shadow and Shade followed, with Valor swooping overhead, and behind her she heard Mira screaming her name, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Because she understood now what this was. Corvin hadn't just tried to kill the king. He'd tried to frame her for it. An attack during her moment of triumph. Chaos that could be blamed on her wild creatures. Evidence that she was too dangerous, too unpredictable. She had to catch him, had to prove what he'd done. Or everything, her position, her life, the future of every creature she'd tried to save, would be destroyed. She chased Corvin through the burning town, her breath ragged, her heart hammering, as the night closed in around her and the most dangerous game of her life began. She chased Corvin through the burning town, her breath ragged, her heart hammering, as the night closed in around her and the most dangerous game of her life began. Shadow kept pace beside her, his massive form cutting through smoke and debris with predatory grace. Shade surged ahead, 6 legs carrying him faster than any horse, while Valor's screech from above tracked Corvin's movements through the maze of narrow streets. Kayla's lungs burned, her legs screamed, but she didn't slow. Corvin and his archer ducked into an alley between 2 collapsed buildings. Kayla followed, rounding the corner just in time to see them scrambling over a pile of rubble toward the town's eastern gate. "Stop them!" she shouted to Shade. The shadow beast launched forward with terrifying speed, cutting off their escape route. Corvin stumbled backward, his face contorted with rage and fear. The archer, a lean man with cold eyes, raised his bow, arrow nocked, and aimed at Shade's head. "I wouldn't," Kayla said, stepping into the alley with Shadow at her side. Behind her, she heard the thunder of more wolves arriving, drawn by the chase. "You fire that arrow, and you won't live long enough to regret it." The archer hesitated, glancing at Corvin for guidance. "You have no authority here, girl," Corvin spat, straightening his crimson robes despite the ash and blood staining them. "I am a lord of the realm. You are nothing but a peasant playing at power." "I'm the peasant who just saved this town while you tried to murder the king," Kayla shot back. "How's that for authority?" "You have no proof. Valor saw you, I saw you, and when we bring you back to Draven, every guard who witnessed the attack will see the truth." Kayla stepped closer, her voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. You wanted me dead from the beginning. You spread lies, tried to undermine everything I built. But it didn't work, did it? So you escalated. Tried to kill Draven and frame me for it. Corvin's lips curled into a sneer. You think the king will believe you? A wildling with delusions of importance? I've served the crown for 30 years. I've advised 3 monarchs. My word carries weight that yours never will. Maybe. Kayla tilted her head. But I have something you don't. Witnesses who can't be bribed or threatened or manipulated? She gestured to the wolves, to Shade, to Valor, circling overhead. They saw you, and animals don't lie. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Corvin's face. Take them, he snarled at the archer. The man raised his bow. Shadow lunged. He moved like liquid death, faster than any human could react, and hit the archer square in the chest. The bow clattered to the ground. The man screamed as Shadow's jaws closed around his forearm, not breaking, not tearing, just holding with enough pressure to make the point clear. Surrender or suffer. The archer went still, whimpering. Corvin backed against the wall, his bravado crumbling. You can't do this. You can't threaten a lord. I'm not threatening you. Kayla's voice was ice. I'm arresting you for treason, for attempted regicide, for crimes against the crown you claim to serve. On whose authority? Mine. The word hung in the air like a blade. Corvin laughed, a bitter, desperate sound. You have no authority. You're a novelty, an experiment. The moment the king recovers, he'll realize you're more trouble than you're worth. And when he does, I'll be there to remind him why people like you need to be controlled. People like me? Different, dangerous, disruptive. Corvin's eyes blazed with genuine hatred. This kingdom was stable before you arrived. Ordered, strong. You've upset the balance with your naive idealism about treating animals like people, about mercy being strength. You've made us weak. Kayla stared at him, and suddenly she understood. He wasn't just afraid of her power. He was afraid of what she represented, the possibility that everything he'd built his life on was wrong, that cruelty wasn't strength, that control through fear was hollow, that there was another way, and if it worked, his entire worldview collapsed. I didn't make you weak, Kayla said quietly. You did that to yourself when you chose fear over understanding, when you decided that anything you couldn't dominate needed to be destroyed. She gestured to Shadow, who released the archer and moved to stand beside her. We're going back to Draven. You'll confess, and you'll face justice for what you've done. And if I refuse? Kayla met his eyes steadily. Then Shade carries you. Your choice. Corvin looked at the shadow beast, 6-legged, blood-covered, eyes glowing in the darkness. And whatever defiance remained in him crumbled. Fine, he spat, but this isn't over. You think you've won? You've just painted a target on your back that will never disappear. Every noble who profits from war, from conquest, from the old ways, they'll come for you, and eventually one of them will succeed. Maybe, Kayla said, but not today. The return to the town center took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Kayla walked ahead, flanked by wolves, with Corvin and his archer forced to march in front of Shade's watchful presence. Townspeople emerged from hiding places as they passed, their faces shifting from terror to shock to something that looked almost like hope. She caught them, someone whispered. The wolf witch caught the traitors. Did you see? The shadow beast obeyed her like a trained hound. By the time they reached the square, a crowd had gathered. Draven sat propped against the fountain, his shoulder bandaged, his face pale but conscious. Mira knelt beside him, her hands steady as she checked his wound. Guards surrounded them in a protective circle. The king's eyes widened when he saw Kayla approaching with her prisoners. Your Majesty, Kayla said, pushing Corvin forward. Lord Corvin orchestrated the attack on your life. His archer fired the arrow. I have witnesses. She's lying, Corvin snarled, trying to regain composure. This is a desperate attempt to eliminate political opposition. Valor saw you on that rooftop, Kayla interrupted. Shadow tracked your scent. Shade heard you giving orders, and I saw you with my own eyes. The testimony of animals is meaningless, is it? Draven's voice was quiet but carried absolute authority despite his injury. I've watched those animals save this town tonight. Watched them follow complex strategies, make tactical decisions, demonstrate intelligence that rivals trained soldiers. He struggled to his feet, waving off Mira's protests. If they say Corvin is guilty, I'm inclined to believe them over a man who spent months undermining my decisions. Corvin's face went ashen. Your Majesty, I have served your family for decades, and plotted against me for months. Draven's expression was cold. Did you think I didn't notice? The rumors you spread about Kayla, the accidents that happened to animals she'd rehabilitated, the constant pressure to have her exiled or executed. He took a step forward, and despite his injury, every inch of him radiated power. I gave you chances, Corvin, opportunities to accept change, but you chose treachery over adaptation. He turned to the captain of the guard. Arrest him and his accomplice. They'll face trial in Valdris for treason and attempted regicide. Guards moved to seize Corvin, who struggled briefly before going limp with defeat. As they dragged him away, he turned to look at Kayla one last time. You won't survive this world, girl, he said, his voice hollow. You're too honest, too trusting, too good. This court will eat you alive. Maybe, Kayla said, or maybe I'll change it before it gets the chance. Corvin laughed, a broken, bitter sound, as the guards hauled him into custody. The square fell silent. Then Draven crossed to Kayla, moving carefully, and did something that shocked everyone present. He bowed. Not deeply. He was still the king, but enough to make the gesture unmistakable. You saved my life, he said quietly, and exposed a traitor I should have seen years ago. Valdris owes you a debt. I don't want a debt, Kayla said, exhausted beyond measure. I just want to keep doing what I'm doing, helping the creatures no one else will help. Then you'll have that, and more. Draven straightened, addressing the crowd. Kayla Thorne is hereby elevated to the position of High Marshal of the Royal Beasts. She will have authority second only to the crown itself in all matters relating to animal warfare, conservation, and welfare. Her word on these matters is law. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Kayla stared at him in shock. Your Majesty, you need protection, Draven said bluntly. Real protection, the kind that comes with unquestionable authority and the power to defend yourself. Corvin was right about one thing. You do have enemies, powerful ones. This title gives you the weapons to fight them. He extended his hand again. Kayla looked at it, understanding the weight of what he was offering. Power. Position. A permanent place in a world that had rejected her. But also responsibility. Danger. The certainty that she'd never be able to return to the simple life she'd built in the mountains. She thought of the griffin flying free, the shadow beast unchained, the wolves choosing loyalty over submission. She thought of all the creatures still suffering, still waiting for someone to see them as more than weapons. She took his hand. I accept. On one condition. Name it. Every handler in the kingdom learns my methods. No more breaking through cruelty. No more treating animals like disposable tools. We build a new system from the ground up. Draven smiled, genuine this time, not the cold mask he usually wore. Agreed, though you realize you've just volunteered yourself for months of exhausting work. Wouldn't be the first time. Around them, the crowd began to cheer. Tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm. The garrison captain raised her sword in salute. The townspeople joined in, their voices rising in a wave of gratitude and awe. Mira appeared at Kayla's side, grabbing her hand and squeezing tight. You did it, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. You actually did it. Kayla squeezed back, too overwhelmed to speak. She'd survived. More than survived. She'd won. But as the celebration grew around her, she couldn't shake the memory of Corvin's warning. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. They stayed in Millhaven for 3 days while Draven recovered and the town began rebuilding. Kayla spent every moment working, helping clear rubble, tending wounded animals, coordinating with the garrison to establish better defenses. The wild creatures who'd answered her call gradually returned to the forest, but not before the townspeople had witnessed firsthand that these weren't mindless beasts, but intelligent beings capable of choice. The captain of the garrison, a woman named Sarah, sought Kayla out on the second day. I wanted to thank you properly, Sarah said, her scarred face serious. My daughter was in the granary when the raiders tried to burn it. One of your wolves pulled her out. carried her to safety by her collar like she was a pup. Kayla felt her throat tighten. Which wolf? Gray female, young, had the kindest eyes I've ever seen on a predator. That would be Mist, one of the younger members of the pack. She made a choice, Kayla said softly, to save your daughter, because she understood that protecting the innocent matters more than following orders. Sarah nodded slowly. I've been a soldier for 20 years, worked with war dogs, horses, even a few bears, but I've never seen animals fight like yours did, with purpose, with strategy. She paused. Would you teach me your methods? You want to learn? I want to be better, to do better by the creatures under my command. Sarah's expression was fierce. If you can turn a shadow beast into a protector, you can teach an old soldier new tricks. Kayla smiled, the first real smile since the battle. Meet me at the garrison stables tomorrow morning. Bring whoever else wants to learn. And an open mind. Sarah clasped her arm in a warrior's greeting. You have my word. Over the next 2 days, 7 more soldiers approached Kayla with similar requests. Word was spreading, not through fear or rumor, but through genuine respect. Through seeing what was possible when you treated animals as partners instead of property. On the 3rd morning, as they prepared to return to Valdris, Mira pulled Kayla aside. You know, everything's different now, right? Mira said, her voice subdued. You're not just the wolf witch anymore. You're a high marshal, a hero, someone people will look to for leadership. I know. And it terrifies you. Of course it does. Kayla gazed out at the town, at the people rebuilding their lives. I'm not a leader, Mira. I'm just someone who understands animals better than people. That's exactly why you're the right person for this. Mira squeezed her shoulder. You don't want power. You want change. That makes you dangerous in all the right ways. Corvin said I wouldn't survive this world. Corvin's in chains waiting for execution. I wouldn't take his advice too seriously. Despite everything, Kayla laughed. They rode back to Valdris with a full cavalry escort, Draven recovering but still in command. The journey took longer this time. The king couldn't ride hard with his injury, and scouts reported increased bandit activity in the region. But Kayla noticed something different. The soldiers no longer looked at her wolves with fear. Several asked permission to approach them, to learn their names, to offer treats from their rations. One young cavalryman spent an entire evening sitting with Shadow, telling the wolf about his family back home. The wolves, in turn, integrated into the column with surprising ease. They scouted ahead, warned of danger, and at night they formed protective circles around the camp. They weren't weapons anymore. They were companions. On the 4th night, Draven summoned Kayla to his tent. He looked better, color returning to his face, the wound healing cleanly, but exhaustion still lined his features. Sit, he said, gesturing to a camp chair. Please. Kayla sat, suddenly nervous. Formal summons from kings rarely meant good news. Draven poured 2 glasses of wine and handed her one. I've been thinking, he said slowly, about what comes next, about how to implement the changes you've proposed on a kingdom-wide scale. And it's going to be harder than either of us anticipated. He took a sip. The war kennels alone house 300 animals across 5 facilities. Each facility has a commander who spent decades using traditional methods. Convincing them to change will be challenging. So we replace them. With whom? Trained handlers who understand your methods don't exist yet. We'd be starting from nothing. Then we start from nothing, Kayla said firmly. We train new handlers, build a new system alongside the old one, prove it works through results, not mandates. That could take years. Good things usually do. Draven studied her over the rim of his glass. You're more pragmatic than I expected. Most idealists would demand immediate wholesale change. I'm not an idealist. I'm a survivor. Kayla met his eyes. I know you can't tear down a system overnight without causing chaos, but you can build something better beside it and let people choose which works. And when the old guard resists, we show them the alternative is obsolescence. The commanders who adapt will thrive while those who don't will watch their units get outperformed by ours. She smiled grimly. Competition is a powerful motivator. Draven actually laughed. You've given this thought. I've had nothing but thought since you made me High Marshal. I don't sleep much anymore. Join the club. He set down his glass. There's something else. The trial for Lord Corvin begins in 3 weeks. You'll need to testify, publicly, in front of the entire court. Kayla's stomach dropped. I'm not good with crowds. I know, but your testimony is essential. Without it, Corvin's allies will claim the charges are fabricated, that I'm eliminating political opposition. He leaned forward. I need you to stand in that court and tell them what you saw, what the animals witnessed, and I need you to be unshakable. What if I can't? Then Corvin walks free, and within a month, you'll be dead. Draven's bluntness was almost comforting in its honesty. He has allies, powerful ones. The only thing keeping them from moving against you is fear that I'll prosecute them next. Your testimony needs to be so convincing, so absolute, that no one questions the verdict. Kayla felt the weight of it settling on her shoulders like iron chains. No pressure, then. None at all. Draven's lips quirked. For what it's worth, I have complete faith in you. You face down a shadow beast with nothing but words. You can face down a courtroom. The shadow beast was more honest about wanting to kill me. Fair point. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the camp filtering through the tent walls. Soldiers talking, horses moving, wolves howling in the distance. Why are you really doing this? Kayla asked suddenly. Protecting me, giving me power. You could have let Corvin's accusations stand, could have exiled me and solved your political problems cleanly. Draven was quiet for a long time. Do you know how many people I've executed? He asked finally. Signed death warrants for? Kayla shook her head. 47. I've been king for 8 years and I've ordered 47 executions. Traitors, murderers, threats to the realm, all justified, all necessary. He stared into his wine. But I remember every face, every name, every moment I made the choice that someone had to die for the greater good. He looked up, meeting her eyes. When I found you in that cabin, surrounded by wolves that should have been with me, I had a choice. Kill you and remove the problem, or try to understand why they chose you. His voice softened. I'm tired of killing being my first solution. Tired of breaking things that don't submit. You showed me there's another way, and if there's even a chance that way works, that it makes me a better king, makes this a better kingdom, then I have to try. Kayla felt something shift in her chest. Not trust, not quite, but the beginning of it. You're not what I expected, she said quietly. Neither are you. I thought you'd be easier to control, easier to direct. He smiled wryly. I've never been more wrong about anyone. Is that a compliment? It's a warning, to myself, that you're going to turn my entire kingdom upside down before you're done. Would that be so bad? Ask me again in a year. What? They reached Valdris 5 days after leaving Millhaven, and the city had transformed in their absence. Banners hung from every building, not the king's crimson and gold, but forest green emblazoned with a silver wolf. People lined the streets, not throwing rocks this time, but cheering. Children waved strips of cloth. Merchants offered free food to the returning cavalry, and they were calling her name. Kayla, Kayla, High Marshal. The Beastmaster. She saved Millhaven. 3 cheers for the Wolf Witch. Kayla rode beside Draven, overwhelmed, as the celebration washed over her like a tide. Shadow pressed close to her horse, sensing her discomfort, while Valor circled overhead to thunderous applause. Breathe, Draven murmured beside her. Smile, wave, act like you're used to this. I'm not used to this. Fake it. That's half of being royalty. Kayla forced a smile and raised her hand in acknowledgement. The crowd roared approval. They reached the palace, and the gates closed behind them with relief. Mira was waiting in the courtyard, grinning widely. You're famous. There are ballads being written about you. Terrible ones, mostly, but still. Ballads? The Wolf Witch of the North is trending in taverns across the city. Also, She Who Walks with Beasts. Also, somewhat unfortunately, the Lady Who Hugs Monsters. Despite herself, Kayla laughed. I hugged 1 monster. Technically 2, if you count Shade. Shade's not a monster. Tell that to the 40 raiders who saw him coming and wet themselves. Mira linked her arm through Kayla's as they walked into the palace. But seriously, you're a hero now. People are naming their babies after you. There's a merchant selling wolf-themed jewelry. Someone started a petition to make valor the national bird. He's not a bird, he's half lion. Irrelevant. You've captured the public imagination, and that, my friend, is more valuable than any title the king can give you. Over the next 2 weeks, Kayla discovered Mira was right. Her authority as High Marshal gave her formal power, but public adoration gave her something more important: legitimacy. When she issued orders to the war kennels, commanders might resist, but their soldiers, who'd heard the stories from Millhaven, followed her methods eagerly. When she proposed new regulations for animal welfare, Lord Corvin's former allies objected, but merchants and craftsmen who'd never had political power before flooded the council with petitions supporting her. The ground was shifting. She started with the easiest targets, the royal menagerie and primary war kennels. She worked 18-hour days training handlers, implementing new protocols, proving through undeniable results that her methods produced healthier, more effective, more loyal animal partners. Sarah arrived from Millhaven with 6 soldiers willing to learn. Within a week, they'd become her first cohort of new generation handlers. "It's like everything I learned was backwards," one soldier, a young man named Tomas, said after successfully working with a lion that had been labeled too aggressive for service. "All those years forcing submission when I could have just listened." "Don't beat yourself up," Kayla told him. "You were taught wrong. Now you know better. That's what matters." Word spread. More soldiers requested transfers to her division. Nobles who'd dismissed her methods started quietly asking questions. And through it all, the wolves remained constant. Her pack, her family, her proof that change was possible. 3 weeks after returning from Millhaven, the trial began. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Every noble in Valdris had secured a seat. Merchants bribed guards for standing room. Servants pressed against windows. The trial of Lord Corvin had become the event of the season. Politics, scandal, and vindication all wrapped into one spectacle. Kayla sat in the witness section, wearing a formal uniform Mira had helped her commission, deep green with silver wolf embroidery, practical but unmistakably official. Shadow and shade waited outside the courtroom, too large for the space, but their presence was felt nonetheless. Draven presided from the high bench, his shoulder heeled, his bearing once again that of an absolute monarch. Corvin stood in chains before him, flanked by guards, his crimson robes replaced with prisoners' gray. The man looked smaller somehow, diminished. The charges were read: treason, attempted regicide, conspiracy to commit murder, abuse of authority. Corvin pleaded not guilty to all counts. His defense attorney, a sharp-tongued woman named Ilara Vess, immediately went on the offensive. "The prosecution's case rests entirely on the testimony of animals," she said, her voice dripping disdain. "Creatures that cannot speak, cannot swear oaths, cannot be cross-examined. This is not evidence. This is fantasy dressed up as justice." The crowd murmured. The prosecutor, a stern man named Gareth, stood. "The testimony is not from animals, but from their handler. High Marshal Kayla Thorne witnessed the crime directly. The animals merely corroborate her account." "A handler with obvious bias," Vess countered. "A handler who has built her entire career on the king's favor and has every reason to eliminate Lord Corvin, who has been her most vocal critic." "Objection!" Gareth's voice rose. "The defense is impugning the witness's character without evidence. I'm establishing motive for false testimony." "Enough!" Draven's single word silenced them both. "The witness will be called. We'll hear her testimony and judge its merits. Proceed." Gareth turned to Kayla. "High Marshal Thorne, please approach the stand." Kayla stood on shaking legs and walked to the witness box. Every eye in the courtroom followed her. The weight of their attention was suffocating. She placed her hand on the oath stone, an ancient piece of marble said to crack if touched by liars, and swore to tell the truth. The stone remained intact. Gareth began gently. "High Marshal, please describe the events of the night in question." Kayla took a breath and spoke. She described the battle at Millhaven, the arrival of the king, the moment of victory, and then the arrow. "I saw King Draven fall," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I heard the second arrow pass my head. I looked up and saw 2 figures on the rooftop, an archer and someone directing him. The second figure wore crimson robes with gold trim, noble's clothing." "Did you recognize this figure?" "Not immediately. The distance was too far and there was smoke. But Valor, my griffin, was circling overhead. He saw them clearly. And what did the griffin communicate to you? Not words, images, impressions. Kayla struggled to explain something she barely understood herself. When an animal I'm connected with witnesses something, I can sense what they saw, feel what they felt. Valor showed me the rooftop, showed me Lord Corvin giving orders to the archer, pointing at the king. The courtroom erupted. Vess shot to her feet. Your Majesty, this is absurd. The witness claims to receive telepathic messages from birds. Griffins, Kayla corrected quietly. Which is clearly impossible and inadmissible. Draven raised a hand for silence. The prosecution may continue. Gareth nodded. Did anyone else witness Lord Corvin on that rooftop? I did. After Valor alerted me, I looked again, saw him clearly, saw him flee when he realized he'd been spotted. And you pursued him? Yes, with Shadow, my wolf, and Shade, the shadow beast. We cornered them in an alley. Corvin didn't deny being there. He threatened me, said I wouldn't survive the kingdom's politics. Those are his words? His exact words? Kayla nodded. He said I was too honest, too trusting, too good, that the court would eat me alive, that he'd been undermining me for months, spreading rumors, causing accidents to animals I'd rehabilitated. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Vess stood again. The witness is clearly embellishing, putting words in my client's mouth to strengthen her case. I'm repeating what he said, Kayla said, finally letting anger creep into her voice. Every word, because he was so certain he'd get away with it that he confessed. Or you're lying to eliminate political opposition, Vess shot back. You have no real evidence, no witnesses except yourself and animals that can't speak. This entire trial is a farce designed to give the king an excuse to execute a man who dared question his judgment. I saw him. The voice came from the back of the courtroom. Every head turned. A soldier stepped forward, one of the garrison members from Millhaven, still bearing bandages from the battle. I saw Lord Corvin on that rooftop, the soldier said clearly. I was helping with the wounded when the king was shot. I looked up at the sound of the arrow and saw two figures. One was the archer. The other wore noble's robes, crimson and gold. I thought it was odd at the time. What was a noble doing on a rooftop during battle? Gareth's eyes lit up. You're willing to testify to this? Under oath, sir, on the oath stone. Whatever you need. More soldiers stood. One by one, they came forward. I saw him too. And I. He ran when the High Marshal gave chase. I heard him threaten her in the alley, heard every word. Kayla stared in shock as a dozen witnesses, people she barely knew, soldiers who had no reason to protect her, stepped forward to corroborate her story. Vess went pale. You're clearly coordinating false testimony. Are you accusing 12 soldiers of perjury? Draven's voice was ice. These men and women who fought to defend Millhaven, who have no connection to each other beyond their service. Vess opened her mouth, closed it, sat down. The trial continued for another hour, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The soldiers testified. The evidence mounted. And through it all, Corvin sat silent, his face a mask of defeat. When the final witness finished, Draven called for judgment. Lord Corvin, he said, his voice filling the courtroom with absolute authority, you stand accused of the highest crimes against the crown. The evidence is overwhelming. The testimony is credible. Do you wish to make a statement in your own defense? Corvin stood slowly, chains rattling. I tried to save this kingdom, he said, his voice hollow. From weakness, from naive idealism, from the belief that showing mercy to beasts somehow makes us stronger. He looked directly at Kayla. You're a disruption, a threat to everything we've built, and I stand by my actions, even knowing they've failed. Then you leave me no choice, Draven said. Lord Corvin, you are found guilty of all charges. The sentence is death by beheading, to be carried out at dawn 3 days hence. He brought down the gavel. The courtroom exploded into chaos, some cheering, others shouting objections, everyone talking at once. Kayla sat frozen, watching guards lead Corvin away, and feeling no triumph, only exhaustion. She'd won. But she'd also made enemies of everyone who'd supported Corvin, everyone who feared change, everyone who saw her methods as weakness. The war wasn't over, it was just beginning. But as Mira appeared beside her, squeezing her hand, and as Sarah and the other soldiers who'd testified surrounded her in silent support, Kayla realized something. She wasn't alone anymore. She had allies, people who believed in what she was building, people willing to stand with her. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. That evening, the palace held a celebration in Kayla's honor. She attended reluctantly, uncomfortable with the attention, but Draven had insisted. "You need to be seen winning," he'd said. "Need people to associate you with justice and victory, not just animals and wilderness." So she stood in the great hall, wearing the same formal uniform from the trial, accepting congratulations from nobles she didn't trust and praise from courtiers she actively disliked. But there were genuine moments too. Sarah approached with a group of soldiers. "We wanted to thank you for teaching us, for showing us there was a better way." "You did the hard part," Kayla said, standing up, testifying. "That took real courage." "We learned from the best," Sarah grinned. "The wolf witch who became a high marshal. Who would have thought?" "Not me, that's for certain." Later, a merchant approached, a woman who ran the largest stable in Valdris. "I've been training horses for 40 years, she said bluntly, using traditional methods, breaking, submission, control. But I watched your wolves at Millhaven, watched them make decisions, show initiative, protect people they'd never met. And I thought, wait, maybe I've been wrong." She extended her hand. "Would you teach an old woman new tricks?" Kayla shook it, feeling hope bloom in her chest. "I'd be honored." One by one, people approached. Not all of them, not even most. But enough. Enough to start changing things. Enough to build something new. As the celebration wound down and people began to leave, Draven appeared at her elbow. "Walk with me," he said quietly. They stepped onto a balcony overlooking the city. Below, lights sparkled like fallen stars. In the distance, Kayla could just make out the mountains where her cabin still stood, empty and waiting. "You know you can never go back," Draven said, reading her thoughts. "To that life, that isolation." "I know. Does that frighten you?" "Terrifies me." Kayla smiled ruefully. "But I think I'd be more terrified of going back, of knowing I could have helped, and didn't. You've changed this kingdom more in 3 months than I managed in 8 years." There was something in his voice, respect, but also something warmer. "Changed me, if I'm honest." Kayla looked at him, really looked, and saw past the crown and authority to the man underneath, someone trying to be better, to do better. "We changed each other," she said softly. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city sleep, and for the first time since leaving her cabin, Kayla felt something she hadn't thought possible. She felt like she belonged. Not because she'd forced herself to fit their mold, not because she'd compromised who she was, but because she'd stayed true to herself long enough that the world bent to accommodate her instead. It was a beginning, not an ending. There were still enemies in the shadows, still obstacles ahead, still battles to fight. But it was a beginning, and sometimes that was enough, and sometimes that was enough. But the kingdom didn't give her time to rest. 3 days after Corvin's execution, as winter settled over Valdris with teeth of ice and wind, word arrived from the eastern border that changed everything. Kayla was in the war kennels, working with a newly arrived bear that had been chained for so long its muscles had atrophied when Mira burst through the door with panic written across her face. "Kayla, the king needs you. Now. It's urgent." The bear rumbled anxiously, sensing the tension. "Easy," Kayla murmured, stroking the creature's scarred muzzle. "I'll be back. I promise." She ran through the palace halls with Mira, Shadow, and 3 wolves at her heels, not stopping until they reached the war room where Draven stood over a map table surrounded by grim-faced generals. "Your Majesty," Kayla said, slightly breathless. "What's happened?" Draven looked up, and the expression on his face sent ice through her veins. "Thornwood is burning." The words didn't make sense at first. Thornwood, the vast ancient forest where shade had been captured, where countless creatures made their homes, where the trees grew so thick sunlight never touched the ground. "How?" Kayla demanded. "The forest is damp year-round. It doesn't just... It's not natural." One of the generals, a stern woman named Vasquez, pointed to markings on the map. Raiders, the same group that attacked Millhaven, or what's left of them. They've been setting fires systematically, driving wildlife out, slaughtering anything that emerges. Why? Revenge. Draven's voice was hollow. For Millhaven. For their dead. They're targeting the creatures that fought against them, sending a message that wild animals aren't beyond human reach. Kayla felt rage ignite in her chest like wildfire. How many? At least 200 raiders, according to scouts. Well-armed, organized. They've been building this for weeks while we focused on Corvin's trial. Draven's hands clenched on the table edge. I'm mobilizing the army, but it'll take 3 days to reach Thornwood. By then, the damage will be catastrophic. The animals are dying. Hundreds already dead. More fleeing into territories where they'll starve or be hunted. His eyes met hers. This is ecological warfare, Kayla. They're destroying an entire ecosystem to hurt you. To prove your methods can't protect what you care about. The room fell silent. Kayla stared at the map, at the marks indicating fire locations, at the arrows showing refugee routes for fleeing creatures. And she made a decision. I'm going. Absolutely not, Vasquez said immediately. You're too valuable to risk. Those creatures are dying because of me. Because they fought for us at Millhaven. Because I asked them to trust humanity. Kayla's voice shook with fury. I'm not letting them burn for that choice. You can't fight 200 armed men, Draven said quietly. Even with your wolves, even with shade and valor, the numbers are impossible. Then I'll change the numbers. What does that mean? Kayla looked at him, and in that moment she understood exactly who she'd become. Not the frightened girl from the mountains, not the outcast desperate for acceptance. Someone who could rally an army without chains or commands. Someone who understood that true strength came from connection, not domination. Someone the wild would follow. It means I'm going to call every creature within 100 miles. Every wolf, bear, mountain lion, hawk, eagle, and predator that can hear me. I'm going to offer them a choice. Stand with me and drive the raiders out, or let Thornwood burn and lose their home forever. That's insane, Vasquez breathed. You can't possibly coordinate that many wild animals. Watch me. Draven studied her face, and whatever he saw there made him nod slowly. How long do you need? Give me 12 hours to reach Thornwood, another 6 to gather the animals. Then we end this. You'll need supplies, horses, a small unit to keep you safe. No soldiers. They'll frighten the animals I'm trying to recruit. Kayla's mind raced. Just me, the wolves, shade, and valor. We move fast, stay hidden, and hit them where they don't expect it. And if you fail? Then the army arrives 3 days from now to bury what's left. She met his eyes steadily. But I won't fail. Not this time. Not when it matters most. Mira stepped forward. I'm coming with you. Mira, you'll need someone to tend wounds, to help coordinate, to watch your back. Her friend's jaw was set. I didn't survive Millhaven just to let you die alone in a forest. I'm coming. Kayla wanted to argue, wanted to protect her friend from the danger ahead, but she also knew she'd need help. And Mira was right. Someone had to treat the wounded, had to help manage the chaos. Fine, but you do exactly what I say. No heroics, says the woman planning to fight 200 raiders with an animal army. Despite everything, Kayla smiled. Get supplies. We leave in 20 minutes. They rode out of Valdris under cover of darkness, just Kayla and Mira on horseback, with 25 wolves, shade, and valor circling overhead. The city was quiet, most citizens sleeping, unaware that the fate of Thornwood, and possibly the entire kingdom's relationship with the wild, was being decided in real time. They pushed hard through the night, the horses driven to their limits, the wolves tireless. By dawn, they'd covered half the distance. By noon, they could smell the smoke. By evening, they reached the forest's edge. And Kayla's heart broke. Thornwood was dying. Massive sections of the ancient forest burned with flames so high they kissed the sky. Animals, deer, foxes, rabbits, creatures with no defenses, fled in panic, many collapsing from smoke inhalation before they reached safety. The air was thick with ash and the terrible sound of a forest screaming. "Oh gods," Mira whispered. "It's worse than the report said." Kayla dismounted, her legs shaking, and walked to the forest line. She could feel it, the terror, the pain, the desperate confusion of thousands of creatures watching their world burn. And beneath that, rage. Pure, primal rage from the predators who'd watched their territory violated, their prey slaughtered, their homes destroyed. They were waiting for someone to channel that rage into purpose. Kayla closed her eyes and called, not with voice, with every fiber of her being, with the same connection that had brought wolves to her cabin, that had freed Valor, that had reached Shade in his darkest moment. I'm here. I see you. I know what they've done. And I'm asking you to stand with me one more time, to fight for your home, to show them that the wild is not powerless, that we protect our own. Choose me. Choose us. Choose to fight back. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Wolves emerged from the smoke-filled trees, not just her pack, but dozens of wild packs. Their alphas stepping forward to touch noses with Shadow in a gesture of alliance. Bears lumbered out of dens, fur singed but eyes blazing with fury. Mountain lions descended from rocky outcrops, silent and deadly. Hawks and eagles gathered in the trees, a parliament of raptors watching with predatory focus. Even creatures Kayla had never worked with before appeared. A pack of wild boars, tusks gleaming, ready to charge. A family of badgers, small but vicious, wolverines, the most fearless predators in the mountains. They came, hundreds of them. Answering her call, trusting her to lead them into battle. Mira stared in absolute awe. Kayla, I've never seen... This is what happens when you give creatures a choice, Kayla said softly. When you treat them as allies, not weapons. She turned to face the assembled army of the wild. The raiders are 3 miles northeast near the river. They have numbers and weapons. They have armor and training. Her voice carried across the clearing. But they don't have what we have. They don't have home. They don't have purpose. And they don't have each other. Shadow howled, a long, mournful sound that was picked up by the other wolves, then the bears, then every creature present until the forest itself seemed to roar defiance. We're going to drive them out, Kayla continued, not with mindless violence, with strategy, with coordination, with the understanding that we protect our own. She looked at Shade, at Valor, at the wolves who'd been with her from the beginning. Are you with me? The answering chorus of growls, roars, and screeches was her answer. They moved through the burning forest like a tide of teeth and claws and wings, and the raiders never stood a chance. The attack came at dusk, when the raiders were settling into their camp, confident in their numbers and their destruction. The wolves struck first, a coordinated assault on 3 sides simultaneously, driving the raiders toward the river where escape routes were limited. Then the bears charged, massive and unstoppable, scattering men like leaves before wind. Valor and the raptors dove from above, talons raking at exposed faces and hands, forcing raiders to raise shields that limited their vision. And Shade. Shade became the nightmare that would haunt these men forever. The shadow beast moved through their ranks like liquid death, taking down anyone who raised a weapon, showing mercy to those who threw down arms and surrendered but offering none to those who continued fighting. Kayla rode through the chaos on horseback, directing the assault with hand signals and called commands, turning what should have been mindless animal fury into a coordinated military operation. Left flank, drive them toward the water. Raptors, target the archers. Wolves, anyone who runs gets 1 warning. After that, bring them down. The raiders tried to form defensive positions, but how do you defend against attacks from ground and air simultaneously? How do you hold formation when bears are charging your line and mountain lions are flanking through the trees? How do you maintain discipline when a 6-legged nightmare is systematically dismantling your unit? They couldn't. Within an hour, half the raiders had surrendered. Within 2 hours, the rest had fled into the forest, pursued by wolves who would drive them back toward Valdris and the king's waiting army. The battle was over. But the cost was devastating. As the smoke cleared and dawn broke over the burned sections of Thornwood, Kayla walked through the aftermath and wept. Dozens of animals lay dead, creatures who'd answered her call and paid the ultimate price, Trees that had stood for centuries were reduced to ash. An entire section of the forest ecosystem was simply gone. She knelt beside a fallen wolf, not one of hers, but a wild male who'd fought with incredible bravery and taken an arrow protecting a younger pack member. "I'm sorry," she whispered, placing her hand on his cooling fur. "I'm so sorry I asked this of you." "Kayla," Mira's voice was gentle. She knelt beside her friend. "You gave them a choice. They made it knowing the risks. They died protecting their home. That matters." "Does it? When so many are gone, when the forest is burning?" "Yes." Mira gripped her shoulders. "Because without them, without you, this entire forest would be ash. Every creature would be dead. You saved thousands by rallying hundreds." Her voice cracked. "You didn't cause this. The raiders did. You just gave the forest a way to fight back." Kayla nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Shadow pressed against her, offering silent comfort. Other wolves gathered close, her original pack and the wild ones who'd fought beside them, no longer separate, but united in grief and survival. Slowly, Kayla stood. "We need to put out the fires, establish safe zones for injured animals, start coordinating relief efforts." "I'll help," Mira said immediately. "So will we." Kayla turned to see Sarah approaching with 50 soldiers, not the 3-day-away army, but an advance unit that had ridden through the night to arrive early. "Your Majesty sent us ahead when he heard you'd engaged," Sarah explained, "said you'd need support." She looked around at the destruction, at the animal corpses, at the exhausted predators resting among the trees. "What do you need?" For the first time since entering Thornwood, Kayla felt hope. "Everything," she admitted. "Medical supplies, water, help containing the fires, people who can work alongside the animals without frightening them." "We brought supplies, and every person in this unit volunteered specifically to work with you." Sarah smiled. "We've been training in your methods. Time to prove we learned something." Over the next 3 days, humans and animals worked side by side to save Thornwood. Soldiers helped put out fires while bears cleared debris. Wolves led rescue parties to trapped creatures, while humans tended their wounds. Valor and the raptors scouted for remaining raiders, while Shade guarded the perimeter. It was exhausting, heartbreaking work. But it was also something unprecedented: true cooperation between species, working toward a common goal without chains or commands. News of the battle spread across the kingdom with the speed of wildfire. Merchants brought supplies, healers volunteered their services. Nobles who'd been skeptical of Kayla's methods sent resources. And on the 4th day, King Draven arrived with the full army. He walked through the recovering forest, seeing soldiers working alongside wolves, seeing bears helping clear fallen trees, seeing the impossible made real. He found Kayla sitting by a stream with Shade, both of them exhausted beyond measure. "You did it," he said quietly, sitting beside her. "You actually did it." "We lost so many," Kayla said hoarsely. "So many creatures dead, so much forest destroyed. And you saved 10 times that number, preserved an ecosystem that would have been completely annihilated." Draven's voice was filled with something Kayla had never heard from him before: awe. "You've proven something I didn't think was possible, that animals can be true allies, that your methods work not just in controlled environments, but in the chaos of war." "I never wanted to prove anything," Kayla said tiredly. "I just wanted to save them." "I know, that's why it worked." He stood, offering his hand. "Come with me. There's something you need to see." Too exhausted to argue, Kayla followed. He led her to the edge of the forest where the army was camped, where hundreds of soldiers had gathered. And as she approached, they began to kneel. Not with fear, not with obligation, with respect. Sarah knelt first, followed by her unit. Then the generals. Then every soldier present, until hundreds of armed warriors were on one knee before a girl who'd spent most of her life being called a monster. "They're not kneeling to me," Draven said quietly. "They're kneeling to you, to what you've accomplished, to what you represent." Kayla stared at them, overwhelmed, terrified, not understanding. And then the wolves began to howl. Shadow started it, a long, mournful, triumphant sound. The other pack members joined in, then the wild wolves. Then every canine in the forest until the air itself vibrated with their song. The bears roared. The mountain lions screamed, valor and the raptors cried out from the sky. It wasn't a war cry, it was a celebration, a recognition that something fundamental had changed, that the relationship between humans and the wild would never be the same. Tears streamed down Kayla's face as she stood at the center of it all, accepted by humans and animals alike, belonging to both worlds without compromising either. "Rise," she said, her voice shaking. "Please, all of you, rise." The soldiers stood, and as they did, they began to cheer. Not for war, not for victory, for change, for the possibility of something better. Well, the journey back to Valdris took a week. Kayla insisted on traveling slowly, ensuring the forest was stable before leaving. She worked with Sarah's unit to establish protocols for ongoing cooperation between the Army and Thornwood's wildlife. She trained local volunteers in her methods. She made sure every injured creature had treatment and support, and slowly, impossibly, the forest began to heal. New growth emerged from the ash. Animals returned to their territories. The cooperation between species that had been forged in crisis became routine. When they finally returned to the capital, the entire city turned out to greet them. But this time, there was no fear in the crowds, only celebration. Banners bearing the silver wolf flew from every building. Children wore wolf masks and played at being beastmasters. Merchants sold carvings of shade, paintings of valor, poems about the Battle of Thornwood. Kayla had become a legend, and legends, Draven explained as they rode through the cheering crowds, were even harder to kill than heroes. "You've changed the kingdom," he said as they approached the palace. "Not through politics or force, but by proving there's another way. Every commander who's watched your methods succeed, every soldier who's fought beside your animals, every citizen who's seen what cooperation looks like, they'll never go back to the old ways. There are still people who hate what I represent," Kayla said. "Nobles who profit from the old system, commanders who see my methods as weakness. There always will be. But they're the minority now. You've won the support that matters, the common people, the soldiers, and the creatures themselves." He smiled. "You've become indispensable. And that, Kayla Thorne, is the safest position anyone can hold." That night, the palace held a feast in honor of the defenders of Thornwood. Kayla attended wearing her formal uniform, and for the first time she didn't feel like an imposter. Nobles approached not with suspicion, but genuine interest in her methods. Soldiers asked questions about training. Merchants inquired about partnerships to supply better equipment for animal handlers. The world was changing, and she'd been the catalyst. But the moment that mattered most came late in the evening, when the crowd had thinned and Kayla stood on the balcony overlooking the city. Draven found her there, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "You look contemplative," he observed, offering her a glass. "I'm thinking about how different everything is," Kayla said. "6 months ago, I was alone in a cabin, convinced I'd die there, convinced I'd never belong anywhere. And now? Now I have a position, a purpose, people who depend on me." She looked at him. "I have a home, one I chose instead of one I was forced into." "Is Valdris home then?" Kayla thought about it. "Not Valdris exactly, but what we're building here, this place where humans and animals can coexist as allies, that's home. That's worth fighting for." Draven was quiet for a moment. Then he said, carefully, "There's something I need to ask you, a proposal." Kayla's heart skipped. "What kind of proposal?" "A political one," but his eyes held something warmer. "The nobility is pushing me to take a queen, someone to stabilize the realm, provide heirs, strengthen alliances." He paused. "I've been declining, because every candidate they suggest wants power, not partnership, wants a crown, not a cause. Your Majesty, let me finish." He set down his glass and turned to face her fully. "I'm not asking you to marry me. Not now. Not when you're still establishing yourself, still building your reputation. But I'm asking if you'd consider it, eventually. When the time is right." Kayla stared at him, completely blindsided. "Why?" "Because you're the only person I've ever met who doesn't want power for its own sake, who challenges me, who makes me better." His voice softened. "Because you walked into my kingdom and changed everything, and I can't imagine ruling without that challenge anymore." "I don't know anything about being a queen. Neither did I about being a king. We learned together." He smiled ruefully. I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I'm asking you to think about it. To consider that maybe your place isn't just as High Marshal, but as someone who shapes the future of this entire kingdom. Kayla's mind raced. Marriage, royalty, a life permanently intertwined with the politics she'd been trying to avoid, but also partnership, the chance to implement her methods kingdom-wide, to protect the creatures who had no voice, to build something that would outlast both of them. I need time, she said finally. Take all you need. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights. And Kayla realized that for the first time in her life, she was choosing her future instead of surviving whatever fate threw at her. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was freedom. But 3 months passed. Kayla threw herself into her work with renewed purpose. She established the first academy for beast mastery, training handlers from across the kingdom in her methods. She wrote protocols for ethical animal treatment that became law. She personally visited every war kennel and menagerie in Valdris, implementing changes and ensuring compliance. The results were undeniable. Animal mortality and service dropped by 70%. Effectiveness increased by 40%. Handlers reported stronger bonds with their charges, fewer injuries, and better performance in every measurable category. The old guard who'd opposed her methods quietly retired or adapted. New commanders trained in her academy took their places. The kingdom was transforming, and through it all, Kayla found herself spending more time with Draven, not as subject and king, but as equals. They worked together on policy, debated strategy, laughed over dinner, rode through the city with wolves and horses side by side. She watched him become the king she'd always suspected he could be, one who led with wisdom instead of fear, who sought understanding before action, who admitted mistakes and learned from them. And he watched her become the woman she'd never imagined she could be, confident, authoritative, respected not just for her abilities, but for her character. On the first day of spring, as new growth emerged across the kingdom and Thornwood fully recovered from the fires, Kayla made her decision. She found Draven in the war room, studying reports from the eastern border. Yes, she said without preamble. He looked up, confused. Yes to what? To your question. From 3 months ago. She stepped closer. I'll consider being your queen, not now, but eventually, when we've built something stable enough that my absence from the field won't destroy it. Draven's face lit up with a smile that transformed him from monarch to man. You're certain? No, I'm terrified. Kayla laughed. But I've learned that the best decisions are usually the terrifying ones, and I trust you. I trust what we're building together. He crossed to her, took her hands in his. Then we have a future to plan, he said quietly. Together. Together, Kayla agreed. They stood there, hands clasped, and Kayla felt the final piece of her new life click into place. She wasn't the frightened girl from the cabin anymore. She wasn't the outcast witch who'd survived on scraps of acceptance. She was Kayla Thorne, High Marshal of the Royal Beasts, hero of Thornwood, teacher, leader, partner. She was someone who'd taken the world's rejection and turned it into revolution. Someone who'd proven that strength came from understanding, not domination. Someone the wild had chosen, and who'd chosen it back. 5 years later, on a crisp autumn morning, Queen Kayla Thorne stood on the palace balcony and looked out over a kingdom transformed. The war kennels had been rebuilt as academies. Every military unit had beastmasters trained in her methods. Thornwood thrived as a protected reserve where humans and animals coexisted peacefully. Her academy graduated hundreds of handlers each year, spreading her philosophy across the continent. Children in Valdris grew up learning that animals were partners, not property. Nobles competed to establish the most ethical breeding programs. Soldiers considered it an honor to work with the royal beasts. And beside her, wearing his crown but still the man who'd chosen understanding over fear, stood King Draven, her husband, her partner, her equal in every way that mattered. Behind them, in the royal chambers, their daughter slept, 2 years old, with her mother's dark hair and her father's sharp eyes, and already showing signs of the same connection to animals that had defined Kayla's life. Yesterday, a fox had walked right up to the princess in the garden and sat down, waiting to be petted. Tomorrow, Kayla would begin teaching her daughter the same lessons she'd learned in that cabin in the mountains. That creatures deserved respect, that strength came from compassion, that the wild would always answer those who took the time to listen. Shadow lay at her feet, gray now around his muzzle, but still fierce, still loyal, still her anchor. Valor perched on the balcony railing, golden feathers gleaming in the morning sun. Shade dozed in the courtyard below, surrounded by children who'd grown up knowing the shadow beast as a protector, not a monster. The wolves, both her original pack and countless others who'd joined over the years, moved freely through the palace grounds, as much a part of the royal household as any guard or servant. "Penny for your thoughts?" Draven asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "I'm thinking about how impossible this all seemed once," Kayla said softly. "How sure I was that I'd never belong anywhere. And now? Now I belong everywhere. To the mountains and the palace. To the wild and the city. To a future I get to shape instead of one that shapes me." She turned to look at him, this man who'd seen potential where others saw threat, who'd chosen partnership over possession. "Thank you," she said simply, "for giving me the chance to prove who I could be." "I didn't give you anything," Draven replied. "You took it. You fought for it. You earned every bit of it." He kissed her forehead. "I just got out of your way and tried to keep up." Below in the courtyard, Mira appeared with the princess, now awake and giggling as a young wolf pup tumbled around her feet. "Your Majesty," Mira called up, "the princess has made a new friend, and before you ask, yes, I checked, and yes, the pup's mother approves." Kayla laughed, the sound free and unguarded. "I'll be right down." She started to turn from the balcony, but Draven caught her hand. "Wait," he said, "just for a moment. Look at what you've built." Kayla looked. She saw a city where children played with wolves without fear, where soldiers and animals trained as teams, where the wild and civilization had found a way to coexist. She saw Thornwood in the distance, green and thriving, protected by laws she'd written and defended by creatures who'd chosen to stay. She saw a kingdom that had learned to value understanding over domination, cooperation over control, wisdom over brute force. And she saw her daughter, laughing as the wolf pup licked her face, already learning the most important lesson Kayla could teach, that the wild wasn't something to fear or conquer. It was something to respect, to partner with, to love. "I see it," Kayla whispered. "I see all of it." "Good," Draven said, "because this, all of this is your legacy. The girl the wild chose became the queen who chose the wild back." Kayla smiled, tears streaming down her face, and realized he was right. She'd started as an outcast, feared and rejected. She'd become a force that reshaped an entire kingdom, not through violence or domination, but through the radical act of seeing creatures and people as they truly were, and choosing compassion over cruelty every single time. The wild had chosen her that terrible night when she was 14, screaming in a forest that answered, and every day since she'd chosen it back. That was enough. That was everything. She descended from the balcony, shadow at her heels, and walked into the courtyard where her daughter waited, the next generation, ready to learn, ready to build on everything Kayla had created. The girl from the cabin was gone. In her place stood a queen, a teacher, a mother, a woman who'd taken the world's rejection and turned it into a revolution of kindness. And as the morning sun rose over Valdris, casting golden light across a kingdom transformed by one person's refusal to accept that cruelty was the only option, Kayla Thorne smiled. She'd survived, she'd thrived, she'd won, not by becoming what they wanted, but by staying exactly who she was until the world learned to meet her there. The Wild Queen had risen, and the world would never be the same.